Every year, this time of the year, we do something really silly. We record an absurdly long podcast going over every single thing that we think is important that happened this year. We talk about all the software updates, industry news and trends, events that have happened, and of course, we talk about the economy and all of the changes that are going on, including the AI revolution that we're all living through. This is a very long podcast. It may very well be the longest podcast I've ever seen in my life, but I invite you to close out 2025 with the team at School Motion, plus a bunch of amazing guests that we had contribute to this episode. This is a long one. There are chapter markers if you want to skip around and just listen to your favorite part, but I promise you, this is going to be the most in-depth review of this year anywhere on the internet. Thank you for being a part of School Motion this year. We think 2026 is going to be an amazing year, and I hope that this kind of gives you closure for 2025. Maybe you wanted it. Maybe this was your best year ever. Either way, sit back, relax, and enjoy the School Motion 2025 End of the Year podcast. Gird your loins. All right, fellas. So three of us have been in this industry in various forms for decades at this point. I think between the three of us, there's got to be probably close to 70 years of experience, which is absolutely terrifying. And I asked this last year. I think I've asked this the last few years, but I want to start by just asking you both, what does motion design even mean right now? Because if I think back to when I got into this field, motion design wasn't even really a term. It was MoGraph or motion graphics. It meant a very specific thing. Now it's like, people are throwing that word around. It means a million different things.
If I could explain it, then I'd be able to explain it to my family at Thanksgiving, who all don't understand what I do.
Yeah, that's much more possible now. So EJ, I'll start with you. What do you think motion design is? And I'm trying to, maybe a good way to think about it is like someone who's discovering the world of animation and seeing cool stuff on screens all over the place. Like they want to get into it. What are they getting into? Like, what is the thing they're going to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think our worlds become more complicated because it used to just be, for what most of our 20-year existence in this field, it was, okay, you use After Effects, and then it evolved to, okay, now you use After Effects and Cinema 4D, and then it was, okay, maybe you use a little bit of Houdini or something. And like every single year, I feel like there's this new tool or this new thing that we're doing that is expanding the pool of the community or just the group of artists that are creating what I would say, if we would go even a layer above motion design, where we're content creators or influencers. Like I just feel like that net has been cast even wider now. And so now you're getting people that are entering the industry that have never heard the term MoGraph before, don't know what the hell it is, doesn't even know who the hell Andrew Kramer is, which blows my mind. I know, it pour one out for Andrew Kramer. But I think that's kind of the thing that we're struggling with is I feel like this is such like an us issue where like the older hat people are like, oh man, no one says MoGraph anymore. It's like, okay, grandpa, like get with the times. Like you're either you're a 3D animator or you're a product designer or UI UX experiential designer. Everyone needs to feel special. So everyone has their special term they like to call themselves. So it's no longer this blob amorphous MoGraph term. But yeah, I would say motion design now is just literally anything that involves some type of motion, whether that's on your iPhone app, your web interaction, your interactive VR thing. Like it's all designing motion and experiences. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Well, for everyone who's worried about Andrew Kramer, I saw him with his shirt off last year at NAB.
He works out.
He's jacked. He looks
he's
great.
In good shape. He's not going anywhere. He's just living the good life, man. That's it.
Yeah, yeah. He's on that protein train.
My name's John Lepore. I am the founder of Black Box Infinite, a practice that helps leading innovators strategize, visualize, and realize the next generation of experiences. I come from a rich background in motion design, working on all kinds of different things from FUI or futuristic technologies that you see in films, to title sequences, to broadcast work, to a whole lot of product design and innovation consulting. And I generally just love the motion design discipline at large. I think it's such an amazing jumping off point for all sorts of incredible things that the world needs right now. And I'm also really thankful that there's an entity like School of Motion that's helping brilliant minds out there harness and take advantage of what this industry has to offer. I do firmly believe that motion design is continually on a trajectory towards disassociating itself with just the term motion design. Like, motion design to me is not After Effects and Cinema 4D or Blender with a little Houdini thrown in for good measure. Motion design is this discipline where you combine visual information, typography, data visualizations, layouts, character designs, and you move them, you make them come to life, you present them in a way that has gesture and action to them. But it's different from just animation or 2D animation or 3D animation. It is something that has this purpose that it serves. It is, it's not just a form in motion, but it's that form with a function. I do hate the fact that motion design is sort of this bastard stepchild of the advertising industry. I think it serves a wonderful purpose in advertising and marketing and is a great medium for conveying those thoughts. But it's really critical to me that anyone who's dabbling in the world of motion design, anyone who cares about the art or the craft of motion design, are also looking outside of advertising or any of the other traditional spaces where this discipline is deployed. Because I think we're now at a point where technology and experiences and products, whether that's an app or a VR experience or an environmental installation, they all are these canvases that benefit from the magical discipline of motion design. And so I do think that we'll continue to see, like, quote unquote motion design or MoGraph studios start to disassociate themselves from just this title or this vertical or this set of tools and start to lean into ways that their approach to motion design is catering towards solving very specific problems or solutions. And so, for example, there's a number of different motion design, quote unquote motion design studios that will specialize in something like sports broadcast graphics, right? And to me, it's not just that these entities are making motion design or making animations or making animated type or stats or intros or transitions. They're not just making QuickTimes with alpha channels to be used during a sports broadcast. They're playing an integral role in enhancing the product that is the sports broadcast. And even broadcast, right? That's going to become a blurry area where, yes, it's a broadcast on linear television, or it's a linear style broadcast on a streaming platform. But those things are going to start to become increasingly more interactive, things where you're choosing what kinds of information and data you want up on the screen, things that will start to feel almost like a hybrid of watching a sports broadcast and playing a sports video game, right? And motion design is going to play a really critical role in that space. And so I just want to make sure that people are looking at these opportunities to say, okay, it's not just motion design inserted into these things, but we're using gesture and motion and information to enhance an existing product. And we're building that product. We're creating that product. We're making a distinct contribution to it. We're not just the motion design department.
So Aaron, I mean, you've been around, you've done a lot of different things in this industry, and you've been, you worked at Sesame Street years ago, and you've done visual effects, and you've worked on short films, and you were actually I guess you were a voice actor in a feature film this year. But you were early on the tutorial train too. You're back from the Creative Cow days. That's where a lot of people know you from. So what do you think about motion design?
It's funny because I don't have to stress about it too much because I've done so much over the years and all these different things. You kind of nailed it for me. Which is like I've never really known even what to call myself. It's like motion designer / animator / visual effects artist. I just kind of, for me, my experience of using all of these tools and doing all these different things, sooner or later they kind of leak into each other. There's always, there's a little bit of character that gets into motion design, even if it's not the main part of it. If we're talking about the motion design in the classic sense, and then visual effects get added into motion design, stuff that we would have considered visual effects years ago, but are now there's Pyro and Sims and all of that. That would never have been motion design. At least that was you didn't do that in a normal studio if you were just doing a quick commercial for something like that. That was the high end stuff that now is just kind of seeped in. And I think that sort of, that stuff becoming more available to everybody. And EJ, you talked about how over the years it was After Effects, and it was After Effects and Cinema 4D, and then it was Houdini. I don't even know. It's not even about the tools anymore. It's just about the kind of work that's being done in motion design is also sort of broadened out, and it's not easy to solve. So to say this is what motion design is, but the way I like to think about it, when someone really asks me, if someone like one of my talk about my relatives at Thanksgiving, they're like, "You do stuff, it's interesting. What is that motion?" I say motion design, and they're like, "Well, what is that?" And I try to say usually there's a football game on TV when I'm at the family thing. So I point to that, I'm like, "See that's motion design." And then a car commercial comes on, I'm like, "That's also motion design." And then that Apple commercial came on, and I'm like, "That's not motion design. That's the one with the stop motion. That's stop motion, but not motion design." I don't know. I don't try too hard to worry about it.
Yeah, I think EJ, you said something that's this seems like maybe a self-created problem for for people who've been in it for a while. It's wait, what am I now? And I think also, at School of Motion, we have kind of a unique version of that problem, which is we have to tell people this is what we teach, and this is the kind of career we can help you get into. And it used to be a lot easier to just say motion design or motion graphics, and people just kind of knew what you meant. And now, and this is going to come up a lot in this episode, and a lot of the guests that we had, contribute to this episode said some version of this, that, motion design used to be an industry or an area that you could work in. And I see this all the time now on the internet where developers say motion design, and people who are doing websites and people who are branding designers are saying motion design. Video editors are saying motion design when they're using CapCut and using some cool filter. And so what is motion design? Well, years ago, I wrote this article from Motionographer, and I was trying to kind of answer this. This was a while ago. This might have been 8 or 9 years ago now. And Adam Plouffe of Battle Axe said something to the effect of motion design is not an industry. It's a set of tools. It's like you have this toolbox that says motion design on it, and you can carry that toolbox over to Microsoft and use it there, or you can carry it over to BMW and work on their, human machine interface, in-car screen stuff. It's all the same. You're using your similar tools. Maybe the software's changing. Now there's AI, which we'll probably mention once or twice in this episode. But actually, for me, I think it's really exciting because this was the first year where I started hearing other people completely outside the industry say motion design, and it meant something close to what I used to think, but different. And it's kind of opened my eyes to just how big this, the opportunities are now. And I know that right now, and hopefully this podcast will dispel some of this, there's definitely a lot of fear around a lot in motion design right now. And I think there's probably still plenty of short-term turbulence that we'll all have to navigate. But in the long run, it is clear to me that the motion design skill set is being used absolutely everywhere now, places you would never expect. And we got a lot of examples of that we'll get into.
Black Box Infinite is positioned almost like a creative consultancy. I don't like to use the word consultancy. It sounds a little gross and icky, but effectively, we're working with different leaders, typically in technology landscapes, and helping them to advance their products. And a lot of what we're doing is taking advantage of new paradigms in technology, whether that's spatial interactions or artificial intelligence or haptics or ways that sound design can be leveraged in products and experiences. And we're helping them just effectively think outside the box. And I do believe that all of these new advances that are coming in technology, they're happening so quickly around us. I think they all deserve a very generous amount of imagination. I think they require not just people who have been building the last generation of digital products, who are all stuck in the same mold of like making apps and lots of rounded rectangles. They need imaginative minds that come from motion design, from visual effects, from film and other spaces, because these new products and experiences, they're capable of so much more than things were even just a few years ago. And so that's a core focus for us at Black Box, looking for ways to bring that blue sky imagination to the table. And we do put a big emphasis on strategic thinking. We're always talking about, any innovation is memorable as long as it is equal parts pragmatic thinking, pragmatic strategy, and cinematic execution. You need the cinematic and the pragmatic to make any of these things especially memorable. And so for us at Black Box, we're doing bits of strategy, we're doing bits of design, and then we're more than happy at any point in the process to dip into the motion design toolkit, which for us is just a reflex. Most of the collaborators that we work with have at least some background or experience in motion design. And when you're thinking through product strategies, but you're able to make animated demonstrations or even animated diagrams or animated charts to convey your point, you can bring these thoughts, these strategies to life in a way where it starts to create more of an emotional resonance. And so when we're working in these spaces, there's always these sort of two layers that I describe. One layer is a group of engineers that's immediately around us who can kill any exciting idea in the first 2 weeks of its conception. And so it's critical that we're hyper empathetic to those engineering-minded individuals, and we're taking their concerns to heart. But then when we can also have some magic, sometimes in the form of motion design, incorporated into these thoughts or strategies or ideas, the high-level stakeholders, that will really capture their attention and get them excited and get them passionate about what's going on.
So that kind of sets the stage. So we're talking about the motion design toolbox with a bunch of tools in it, and that toolbox keeps getting bigger and bigger, like cramming stuff into it now. Okay, so before we go any further, I always like to do a quick School of Motion update. This year, I think, was probably the biggest year of change we've ever had since we started the company. So if you follow us, if you're a student, it's probably obvious what I'm about to tell you, but we made this huge shift this year. Back in April, we made the decision, which was really difficult and kind of scary, but the same way motion designers are looking and trying to read the tea leaves, what should I be doing? What does the new normal look like? What's going to be useful in 10 years versus right now? We had to do the same thing. E-learning is kind of going through its own little renaissance, and there's companies like Skillshare and Domestika that have been around for years. Domestika is kind of having a PR crisis right now. You guys can Google that if you want to. And then, there's still like YouTube, and then we've always been kind of in the middle, and we've been trying to figure out, okay, given what motion design is turning into, what do we need to do? So what we did was we launched All Access. So up until this year, if you wanted to take our courses, you had to buy them one at a time. They only ran at certain times of the year. And if you wanted to take like 10 of our classes, it would be very, very expensive. And we found that it was just kind of hamstringing artists who, if you don't know anything and you want to learn animation principles and design, and then how After Effects works, and then maybe some advanced After Effects, we're talking like $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, and you have to schedule it to be able to do it. Well, now it's way cheaper. It's a subscription, but you get access to every single class whenever you want. You can take them all if you want to. If you want to just kill yourself and try to take every single one in a year. I'm not sure that's actually possible. Someone will prove me wrong. But we also kept all the stuff that we're known for. There's unlimited critique from actual human artists on everything that you turn in. We have an amazing community that you get access to. We've started doing live monthly portfolio reviews and guest workshops, which have been really successful, and a whole bunch of other things. So we completely changed our product this year, and it's been a very successful year. It turns out that our instincts were pretty close to spot on. Like, this seems to be what our audience has been asking for. And it's really cool because one of the things that makes me really happy is some of the classes that didn't get as many registrations in the past, like our design classes, for example, because that's kind of like tough medicine to take. You know, they're hard and you don't get the instant gratification of like learning a new trick in After Effects. Now, because they're part of the subscription, enrollment is way up on those. And I think that's really important because I think that good taste is going to be the differentiator, which we'll get into. So other than that, we also have really scaled up our team training program this year. We brought on a head of sales, Anthony Sims, who's been amazing. And one of the coolest things, and you were both there, was we actually did our first live workshop with one of the teams that's on there, CBS Sports, and we actually flew to New York, and we got to bring Jonathan Winbush, and we did this whole awesome 2-day workshop with them, got to hang out in the city. And this is something that we're going to be scaling up next year too. We're talking to another company about doing one early next year, a very large company, and they're actually very interested in cavalry, believe it or not.
You know, that experience, I think, was really eye-opening for us because of the conversation we had with people there about what tools they're using, what their struggles are. Like, you know, again, like, we're doing this online. I'm sure people talk to us, but when you're in that room with like people who are doing this every day, like, those conversations lead to some really good things that are coming from us in the future, different kinds of courses that we need. And coming back to the idea that you said that, like, you know, other courses weren't being used before. I was thinking about this with Blender, for example. You know, I'm gonna dive in this year for sure. And I've never, you know, like, I don't think that I ever would have said like, hey, I'm gonna buy a Blender course. But because we have that entire offering and I can do any of it, like, I'm going to do it. And I think that a lot of people will too with that and many other courses. Like, we have the UX one coming. Someone who's maybe would say, I don't know if that's for me. Do I really want to spend a few $100s or $500 on a course? Now they're going to be like, it doesn't hurt me to go in and take a look. I'm already learning After Effects, and it's going to be really helpful for their career because of all the reasons we just talked about before, which is that what motion design means is completely changing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you bring up a really good point, Aaron, which is, you know, I think, and we'll talk about this a lot in this podcast, what the new generation of motion designer needs to be really employable. I mean, it's going to depend on sort of who you're working for and the kind of clients you have or what company is employing you. But the field is so broad now. I mean, you could do the traditional Photoshop, After Effects, maybe some Cinema 4D. You could also go right to Figma and start using Rive and learn a little bit of code and also be a motion designer. And I have friends at Google that do exactly that. I mean, the guy that teaches our UX Animation Essentials course, Ivan, he's been at Google for years. And yeah, he's a motion designer and he started in After Effects, but he's using things like ProtoPie, something that I bet a lot of people listening to this don't even know what that is. But you will if you get into that world, and it's got, you know, a graph editor, and it's, you know, it's an animation tool. It's just designed for a specific thing, and in order to use it, you kind of have to know some other things, and that's what this first course on UX animation is about.
Ivan Witteborg here. I'm a UX motion designer at Google. I'm also the founder of the YouTube channel Motion UX that teaches folks how motion happens in real product teams. And I'm the teacher of the newest School of Motion course, UX Animation Essentials. Tech has gotten faster and technology has just gotten a bit more robust as far as the workflow from getting a motion concept into production. And so that's moved things from typically out of scope, meaning we're just not able to do this for the specific time period that we have to work on a product, to typically in scope. And the typical user experience of apps and websites have a lot of motion integrated into those experiences. And so now it's kind of an assumed that you will have some sort of motion, some sort of interaction, some sort of like fancy animations within your experience. And so now it's more so table stakes that most products will have this. That has made it so that motion is actually in scope now and making it to the end product. Motion is also now included earlier on in the process, not just waiting until the very end to like put like a nice looking flashy thing on to the end, but considering that as you are developing the entire UX of a product, so that you make sure that the motion is very deeply integrated. Things like Lottie and Rive have definitely helped that to be way more accessible in bring motion into scope and be way more feasible.
I think, Joey, that it's worth saying that, like, you know, something you mentioned again, look, was the idea of this transference. You know, you have this graph, right? Like, these skills that you learn at the fundamental level that we're teaching, for example, in, you know, animation boot camp, whatever, these are the kinds of things that doesn't matter what program you go to or even what area, like these concepts of animation, they will carry through, which is why, like, you know, I love jumping to another program. Like, I moved to Unreal a couple of years ago. And for me, it wasn't like, what do I do? It's like, where are these buttons? That was my big thing. Like that was it. Like, I already know what I want to do and how I'm going to do it. I just don't know where those controls are. And that's the thing, is this stuff is transferable completely between space to space.
Yeah, one of the things about the All Access that I think is the biggest benefit of it is it frees us up from doing these hulking 32-hour courses. Like my Cinema 4D course is 32 hours, and if you're just buying that, like, yeah, you're getting your value plus some. But you know, now we have this Blender course, and the thing that's great about the Blender for 3D artist course is it's built specifically for people that already know 3D. You know, Aaron, as you're saying, like, if you learn 3D in one app, it's so easy to translate. It is exactly, where's this button in this app, because I know what it is in this other one. So the ramp up time to be able to learn any app you want, once you learn something like an After Effects, and once you learn a Cinema 4D, like our Blender for 3D artist course, I think is maybe 7 hours long. Like, so you could bang that out in a week and get up and running in Blender, you know, in a couple weeks versus, you know, what would be months to just get up and running in 3D in general. So that's one of the things that I'm really, I talk about this a little bit later on, where, you know, if you're a veteran in this industry, the software is just getting so easy to use these days that it's not as daunting as it once used to be to learn something like an Unreal Engine or to learn something like a Blender, because, you know, Blender 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it made no sense. I mean, it makes a little more sense now, same with Unreal, but it just goes to show that everything's getting easier. Everything's getting more accessible. By the way, those two apps, Unreal, Blender, they're free, so there's no financial burden there. So I think that's one of the, you know, if we want to start off this podcast with some good news, I think we already talked positively before about how just what is available to us as far as industries goes as motion designers is expanding. I think just what we can do with the technology and the tools available to us so easily now is also expanding as well. And the tools are getting even better, and the tools are becoming even more numerous as well to do exactly what you want to do.
So yeah, EJ, that's a good point. Like, you know, we've made these courses a lot shorter so we can make them faster. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I think a huge one is just that, like, software changes way faster now. And on top of that, stuff, you know, everything's changing faster, right? And so we need to be more responsive to our students and to the industry. So if something pops up that changes the way everyone should be doing something, I don't want to have to wait a year to, like, teach everybody that, right? I want it to be faster. So we've scaled up our course creation quite a bit. This is the most courses we've ever put out in a year. We put out Blender for 3D artists, Premiere for motion designers, Rive Academy Volume 2, After Effects Insider, and UX Animation Essentials. And we have a lot of courses in production that are coming out next year. And potentially, we may even scale up and try to put out more, but we've got a Cavalry course coming out early next year, our first Figma course with an amazing instructor, used to work at Animate, so a really great designer. EJ's doing Substance course, another Cinema 4D course. We've got another Unreal course. We've got another Blender course. We're reworking our design curriculum. And then we're also doing all of these workshops every month. There's a new live workshop that we record on our community, and those let us be really responsive. And I suspect we'll be doing more AI-related ones next year, because AI is something that's very hard to make a course about, because even if you can do it quickly in like 2 months, it's still probably out of date like a month later, right?
Yeah. I was thinking about this morning. How does Curious Refuge that, you know, like, even keep up? Like, I don't even understand how they could do that. I think it's very difficult for them, Aaron. I do not think it's easy. Yeah. And I think that they're doing a similar thing that we are, where, you know, they have their courses that you can go and you can take a course and learn the basics, but then they have a team training program, and they're working directly with studios and agencies and film studios and stuff like that, and doing training for them.
So, when it gets to the high level like that, and it's like, no, teach me exactly how to do the thing I need to know right now. Sometimes the course isn't even the best way. That's one of the reasons we're getting into these live workshops for some of our teams that we work with, because, like we found out in New York, like a few hours in person with someone just asking you the question in front of a computer, it could save them months, right? Courses are amazing. And I think there's no better way of like getting up to speed, getting 80 to 90% of the way there. But when you're working on live sports broadcasts, 90% is not good enough, right? You need that extra 10%. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. So yes, a lot. I probably forgot some stuff. We did another collab with Puget Systems this year. Mm-hmm. We did a really cool video with Deep Sky Studios in Portland, Oregon. I gave a talk there, and then EJ gave another talk that's on our YouTube channel. So we're also trying to play with different ways of putting content out, and our North Star is always, is this useful? And not just like, is this a cool After Effects trick that we can teach you and you'll feel good about it, and maybe you use it, maybe you don't, but you feel good. It's like, no, I want us to be able to give you insights that will help your career. Like, hey, here's a business opportunity that no one's looking at that I keep hearing about, that kind of stuff. All right, and we're going to talk a lot about the business of all of this and the Mo economy. But first, we always like to feature work that we saw this year that we really like, and artists and studios. And I think I always say pick 3, and then I pick more than that. I picked 3 this year, but there's an honorable mention. So I'll do my 3 first. Okay, so these are my 3 favorite pieces, okay? And they're picked for all different reasons. The first one is the Severance Season 2 opener. First of all, show's amazing. It's probably my favorite show of the year, although Pluribus may overtake it if you haven't seen that. It's really good. But the opener was done by Oliver Latta, and what I like about it, it's not technically it's great. It's 3D, and there's the main character from the show. But what I love about it is how surreal it is. And one of the things that kept coming up in the guest contributions to this podcast was that what AI has really done is it's shown everybody, especially artists, how important taste is. And taste is now the new word that no one's going to be able to define. It's going to take us 20 years to know what taste is, but it's when you see it, right? And that piece has so much taste. Just everything, the camera movements, the lighting, the subtle little details, the way it ties in with the show. If you watch the show, you watch the intro, you get all these little inside things. And I love that. And I love that, title sequences, they're not quite as like prestige as they used to be. They don't get, as much attention, and every streaming platform has a button to skip them. Which I use, by the way, but I feel guilty every time I do it. But I love that that's still kind of like the high watermark for creativity in the world of motion design. Title sequences are still an opportunity to flex and show off and show how much taste you have. And I thought Oliver did an amazing job. The second piece was just a traditional ad, a spot for Coinbase that Buck did. And what I love about this is, again, it's taste. It's like, if you go to Nano Banana and say a thumbnail for a video about, crypto, it's going to make some really garish 3D, shiny looking, render look. That's what I would imagine, right? And Buck went the complete other way. It looks like an ASCII terminal. And they used Cavalry and probably a bunch of other techniques to basically make like these particle systems that are made out of like keyboard characters, and they build into things, but it kind of looks like, early 90s, late 80s, like ASCII artwork. It's super cool. And it's one of those things where how hard it is to make a simple idea like that work across a commercial and have the transitions and the motion, and they had to build systems to be able to do this. And Buck is still like just at the top of the food chain in my book. Everything they do is amazing. They just did an amazing campaign for Dunkin' Donuts. And they're one of those companies that's gone way up market, where they're not a motion design studio anymore. And they're not, you could call them an agency, but even that kind of short sells what they're capable of these days. But they can still do the MoGraph stuff. Like, they're still the kings and queens of that.
My name is Justin Cohn. I'm the Executive Director of Communications for Buck and Residence. We are functioning a lot more now like an agency. We're providing strategy. We're developing concepts that scale across many touch points. and not just motion, right? Photography and copywriting and live action production and packaging, out of home, all these other touch points that go way beyond just traditional kind of design and animation work that some people know us for.
And then the last one was a piece from Sin. So Tony and Thanos, I will butcher their last names if I try. They're Greek. But they're Yeti, and they made a studio project called Sins, which is amazing. It's kind of reminiscent of like Seven. You know, it's about the 7 deadly sins, and it's all 3D. They're kind of known for their amazing cinema 4D work. I'm sure they're using Houdini for some things, but it's like they have nailed the art of like surreal photorealism, where everything looks real and they've got the lighting and the shaders and all that like dialed in, but they push it. And, you know, it's harder than you'd think to make 3D that makes you feel gross. You know, like when you see something and you're like, ew, it's actually really difficult to do that, you know? Like one of the toughest things as a 3D artist is to make food that looks delicious. Well, doing the opposite is also kind of hard, you know? It's just, there's little subtleties. And again, it's taste, right? To be able to do that, to know when it's right, to stare at something and be like, it's not quite there. What do I need to add? Oh, it's not specular enough. You know, little details like that masters of 3D know. So I thought that piece was amazing. And then honorable mention, this is a feature film. So Seth Worley of Red Giant, good friend of Aaron's, he released his first like theatrical release of a feature film called Sketch this year. And I took my family to it, and I thought it was the best movie I've seen all year. And I just saw Wicked 2. It was better than Wicked 2, which actually I didn't think was very good. But Sketch was amazing. It's kind of like a throwback to like old Spielberg movies. It kind of has that feeling of like The Goonies, where kind of feels like a kid's movie, but it's kind of scary, and there's some really adult themes in it. My kids loved it. My son said it was his favorite movie of the year. And what's crazy is the budget for that film, Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was $5 million.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that.
Just like,
Seth and I know Hashi worked on it. Probably a bunch of people like in our circle worked on the visual effects for it. And it looks like, you know, a $200 million film.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful. The character stuff is incredible. Yeah. Like the way that they, like, you know, if you say the idea of I'm going to take something that looks like it was made by a kid and bring it into the real world, like that can go wrong in 100 different ways and not look like it belongs. But they found a way to make those characters look like they actually were from another world but belonged in ours. And I thought that was really awesome.
It's incredible. And when you see behind the scenes for like Transformers or a Pixar movie, there's all this proprietary stuff, and there's like, you know, the hair simulation specialist and their assistant. I mean, you know, these giant teams to do all this. And when you see the behind the scenes of Sketch, it's Seth like in After Effects doing like the hackiest tracking thing to fix a shot, and he's good, so you can't tell. Like, he does a good job. It's Hashi hacking Cinema 4D to make it look like a bird is hitting a window and splatting against it and feathers flying off, and it's all particular. And they're using like all the tools that motion designers know. And it just looks amazing, and it's in a feature film. It's really good, and I hope that film has like a second life on streaming or something, because I'm sure not enough people saw it. It was really, really good, and I hope that just kickstarts Seth's career.
It's funny, you know, you said something about the movie being scary. It's funny because this little girl, I was in the theater, and I was talking to my son about the film, and she said, "Oh, like, what do you know? You've seen it before?" And I said, "Yeah," and she said, is it really scary? Are the monsters scary? And I was like, listen, kid, the monsters, like, that stuff's all going to work out. It's more the emotional stuff you're going to probably be in therapy for the rest of your life about. That's the... Yeah.
There's that one part. You know the part. Yeah.
There's a lot of trauma. It's the film deals with a lot of emotional trauma, and it did a great job of it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. So everybody check those out. All that stuff will be in the show notes. So you can, if you're listening to this, you're not watching, you can just go see those. Really cool stuff. And and now EJ... And it's funny, I didn't look at EJ's until just now, and I noticed he picked one of the same ones as me.
I did, and
right, EJ,
I didn't see that last night, but I went and did a late edition there. But yeah, I also like the season 2 title sequence for Severance. I thought that was pretty cool, and I love the show itself. So for that, and the one thing I wanted to mention about the Seth Worley thing is. Joey, you called out a really great point where it's like, oh, you know, I feel like After Effects users and Cinema 4D users don't have that flow moment where it's like, oh, these are the tools that I use every day being used in a feature film. And I hope, Seth and Sketch, I believe they should win a ton of awards. But I mean, I think that's like, you almost need that validation thing. I mean, you knew what happened to any Blender artist that saw when Flow won the Academy Award, and I think, any good kind of, confidence boost or anything of like, oh, the tools I use can be pushed this far. I think you don't necessarily see that for After Effects and Cinema 4D artists beyond your, like you said, the Severance, opening title sequences for things, not specifically like used throughout a film, especially with character stuff too. So just wanted to call that out. I thought that's the Sketch thing was a really good thing to mention, and
legit.
the tools we use. Speaking of the tools we use, so I did this event in Tokyo last month and met a lot of amazing artists from Japan, all over Japan. And one of the studios that one of their artists did a presentation for us. The studio is called Khaki Inc. So just like khakis, and they do some of the most insane VFX and like 3D and motion graphics work that I've ever seen. Like as far as like a studio that I've never heard before up until that point. I don't know how big they are necessarily, but they're doing like buck level stuff. And one of the things that they just came out with like a few days before our conference came out was this piece that was just a short film called Wave. And it's almost kind of like a music video. It's just this dude dancing. And while he's dancing, the background behind him starts to like fluctuate and kind of distort and stuff. And what I thought was really interesting was basically it was a short film to test out AI and like, how can I use AI with this? And so he was using AI and the hallucinations concept to make it look like the viewer's kind of hallucinating and the whole background's kind of tripping, and there's like a apartment complex behind him that's doing this kind of crazy ripple effect thing too, and the floor is distorting and rippling as well. And it almost looks like, I think we talked about this maybe, if it wasn't last year, it was 2 years ago, where it was like the whole kind of data moshi AI smearing look is going to be its own aesthetic. And I think this is kind of like an example of like, let's take that weird kind of almost not data moshi, but just weird smeary hallucination morphing thing and actually apply it not to the whole, full screen, but in certain, using it as like a VFX kind of effect, which I thought was pretty interesting. They also used like AI for face replacements. And so this character kind of duplicates in one of the shots as well. And they do some really good behind the scenes stuff too, if you want to check it out, of how they kind of achieved some things. They used Move AI. They did AI face swapping, AI relighting. What else they do? They trained their own like LoRa model. So it's just one of these really interesting things where they're utilizing AI with traditional VFX pipelines. And the funniest part is that the one thing they had to manually do was rotoscoping, which I thought was the most ironic part of it all. Is like the most boring thing you still had to AI didn't do.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely check that out. I really love the piece. And like I said, they have a really good making of that is just fascinating of how they kind of put things together. And then another piece that I really enjoyed was a piece for Yaosobi. So it's a PlayStation thing that was, I don't know what they're technically marketing. I think just PlayStation in general. It's Project Memory Card. And it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't know what it's marketing. It just looks super cool. So they have these like kind of 3D anime characters, and like I'm a sucker for really good smearing and squash and stretch and stuff done in really really good ways. And so I just love it's got stop motion feel. The lighting's really cool. Like again, it almost looks like a 3D anime, and it's just really fun. And it's cool to see like the stylized 3D as well. Feel like there's so much of the realistic stuff out there that I always really gravitate towards the very stylized kind of stuff. So that was really cool. Speaking of the stylized stuff, there is also a piece that was, so I've talked about like a personal, like a short film. And this one's just a fan film for League of Legends by a studio called Seven Knights. And it's crazy because this, I just saw on YouTube, like when I was looking this up last night, that they only have like 674 views on YouTube. And this piece is like crazy. So they used Blender, Houdini, and did all these crazy like water effects and fur effects. And they really bring to life the little League of Legends characters really well. Again, very stylized kind of look as well. But I've never heard of Blender being used alongside Houdini much before, so it's just kind of interesting to also see again the tools and how they're being utilized alongside other different tools that are maybe more traditional as far as like the VFX stuff as far as Houdini goes. But they have like really cool sand sims, and it's something where it's like you would typically think Houdini is used in this very realistic way, but it's again very stylized. Like I'm a sucker for stylized stuff. So yeah, check those out, and definitely again they have a breakdown too behind the scenes of the fan cinematic for the Seven Knights, but give them some more views than 674. I just don't understand.
That's wild.
How they like.
I wonder
It's
if it's on another channel or somewhere else that
Yeah.
that it is, that exists. I don't know.
Well, they only have 65 subscribers on their Seven Knights Studio YouTube, so maybe that's it. But yeah, super cool work.
All right, Aaron. And everyone should know that last year, Aaron didn't know he was doing this enormous 4 or 5 hour podcast record until I think 15 minutes before. But this time, he had time to prepare. So what are your favorite pieces this year?
So, I mean, hands down for me, the number one was the Meat Department opener for Duster. I saw, Joey, that's on your list of favorite studios this year.
So
but
good.
like that, I don't know. I loved it so much that I kind of ripped it off to make my short film, The Getaway. Just like, the idea of using little cars and stuff like that. I've always loved stop motion. And even though this one doesn't really feel like stop motion completely, there's this sort of feeling of their toys, and it's very small with macro type
tilt
photography.
shift,
Yeah, it's like there's a lot of depth of field, so it feels like they're small. They don't move like they're stop motion, but it feels almost like we're looking at toys being played with. And I loved what they did with that. Like, I think that's such a great piece. I'm really bummed the series got canceled too, but it was such a great piece. And yeah, hands down for me, that's the first one. I covered this in Motion Mondays, but Lucas Piazzini, it's not even necessarily the greatest piece of work. He's really good. He works at Industrial Light and Magic, and he took part in Punisher's Rampage Rally Challenge. He did this piece that was based on Alita Battle Angel, and what I loved about that was not just the piece itself, but because he's like someone who's very into process, and obviously at ILM, you don't just like make things randomly. You put a lot of thought into it. He has like a 22-page breakdown of how he did everything. So like you can watch the video and then you can actually like see all the different pieces that went into it, and you realize that like just what it takes to look something to look that good. It's just stuff you take for granted. You're like, oh, it's 3D, like you can do this. Like, I know that once you start using it, you can see how hard it is. But the level of detail that he put into that is incredible. And so it's like the combination of like a really good piece of work plus like a behind the scenes that really helps you to understand like what it takes to make something like that. I'm going to come back to one I have written down, and I'm going to jump out of order here, but I've got Kevin Parry also did the stop motion thing. I love stop motion. I did my Star Wars, the woodcut that
genius.
was like right. But Kevin Parry's did the stop motion thing where he was like sort of driving, and it's like incredible. And he has also a behind the scenes that shows you how he did it. And it's like, you almost like, why would you do that to yourself, man? But he did it. It's beautiful. It's hilarious. It's funny. It's just like, it's really fun to watch the whole thing happening. He just did it by himself, moving items around his office space and making sort of this thing like he's driving, sitting at a desk. It's pretty cool. And the last one was one that I actually saw. EJ, I feel like maybe you covered this. I'm not sure. It was in Motion Mondays, but it was proper AG1. It might have been Joey, but it's this like, I can't even say it's like the greatest commercial or anything like that. It's for like a beverage, but their use of color and composition and light, it's so perfect that like it's almost like they're slumming it, like a little bit. Like, and I don't know, the brand is not like a famous brand all over the world, like, but it it's so nice looking and it's so slick and like really super high end design that I just like it really stands out to me as like when you put good design behind something that's not even that big a deal, like it looks like a much bigger deal. And I thought that was a really great piece just from the perspective of like making motion design that was very heavy in the design, you know?
Yeah, that piece in particular, you know, I'm gonna say the word taste 100 times. Like, there's little tiny details in there, like the water droplets on the glass. They look perfect, but every time it cuts to a new scene, it's different water droplets. Like, you know, there's just little things like that where, you know, I think everyone's probably listening to this waiting for us to talk about AI, and we can kind of sprinkle it in until we get to the AI section. But like, those are the kinds of choices that. I mean, maybe there's a world where AI can make choices that are that like tasteful, but we're not even close to that yet. And maybe AI can help render, you know, a displacement map for water droplets and save you some time there. But like a human has to make those choices, right? And so I think that's kind of a theme. I think with a lot of this stuff, you know, the meat department opener, Aaron. Again, it's like. The choice of pairing like a car chase, Dukes of Hazzard style car chase, with tilt shift photography, but they didn't make the environments look like a toy. Just the cars kind of feel like toys. Everything else looks very realistic, but miniature. And it's just like that idea and the taste that's necessary to say, this shot's not working. Why? Oh, it's because that tree is too out of focus. Bring it closer so we can tell it's a tree. You're not reading the silhouette. Like. There's all those things that in all the best work, it's like until you look for it, you don't even know it's there. But when it's not there, it doesn't work.
You know, it's funny, Joey, that thing you just said. Like I saw Tron Ares in theaters in the theater this year. I don't tend to go, like, not a lot of movies will get me to see it. And the truth is, this movie wasn't particularly stand out as an amazing movie. The design in it was so good, and I think it's going to be completely missed. But there were moments on screen, like when they're in the Tron world, you know, they're in the grid and water splashes on the lens. The lens drops were square shaped and they were just barely noticeable. But I was looking at it, I'm like, I'm the only guy in the theater that even caught that, I'm sure. Right. And I'm like, that is the kind of design that somebody thinks about, like, how does this make sense in this world? How does that design fit with that? And that, like, it's just barely there, but visually it makes just, for, you know, like, as I'm experiencing it, I'm like that is that, like, I feel like I'm not in the same world. I'm in the digital world. Yeah. Like, it's just subtle, you know?
Yeah. Taste, man. It's taste. All right, let's go over our three artists and studios that we thought did awesome stuff this year. And of course, God, I feel like, especially since we started doing Motion Mondays really regularly, we've done it like this whole year. I keep finding new studios doing insane stuff that I hadn't heard of. They weren't on my radar, or maybe I'd heard of them, but I just didn't know them. And I'm like, good Lord, like, there's so many killers out there. So this artist, I'm pretty sure I discovered him this year, but this year he had a big year, is Ryan Corneal, Duke Gunston on X. And Ryan, I started seeing these, and Aaron, you probably sent me the first one because you track Unreal more than me. Ryan figured out this cool way of making live controllable puppets in Unreal. So he's got some hand controller where he can do this with his hand, and the puppets have physics, and if there's fur on it, it goes up and down based on what his hand's doing. He can open and close the mouth, and then he probably has some keyboard controls for the eyes to blink and stuff. And they look 100% real. They look like real Muppets. But he can have the camera move, he can have the environment react, they're running in real time. And the first time I saw that, I was like, this opens up an entirely new type of content. There's been stuff like this in the past where they tried motion capture to have live puppets and stuff. I've never seen anything work as well as this. And I think part of it is just the choice he made to not try to make this like have legs that can walk and, you know, look like a real monster or something. It looks like a hand puppet. But because it's 3D, these hand puppets can do things normal puppets can't really do. The arms can stretch, and you know, you can program in like behaviors. If it gets close to this, something crazy happens. So I thought that was amazing, and I remember writing to him and saying, dude, this is incredible. Like, we'd love to like feature you. And he's like, yeah, I just started posting these because it's fun. And then all these opportunities popped up, and he couldn't tell me at the time, but he's now the co-founder of some studio called Sans Strings Studio. In French, it would be sans string, without strings. And he also, which I think is really cool, and I haven't seen anything about it in a while, is he's working on a boxing game. and it was showcased at IGN and made like a big splash in the video game world. But it's using his puppets and his models, but they're boxing, and it's kind of like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out with Muppets. So I think we're gonna hear like, you know, big things from this guy. Like he figured out something really, really cool. It's technical, but also he had the taste to make it like appealing. So that was really cool. There's another guy, and for the life of me, I tried to find his real name and I couldn't find it. Enigmatic_E on X. So this dude, and he's also got a YouTube channel, not a huge following yet, but this guy is doing crazy stuff with AI tools. And I've been looking all year, and I'm sure a lot of artists have been looking for stuff made with AI that like moves you or is really cool. And, you know, the stuff he's doing, he's like a visual effects artist kind of person, but he's using AI in really, really clever ways and then mixing that with visual effects techniques. So he's doing things like shooting himself on a green screen and then generating the background with AI, but then also using a style transfer tool to, you know, change something about the way he looks, or adding like a helmet to his head that wasn't there, but the rest of him is unchanged. And so what I thought was cool about, and he does little mini tutorials. He's using Comfy UI and some other like kind of more advanced AI tools to do this. And what I thought was so cool about it was I kind of found him like towards the first half of the year. And that was like my first sense of, okay, you know, going to like Midjourney and typing in the image you want and hoping it gets close, it doesn't work, right? Like, I mean, you can use it for certain things, but that's not ideal. And then there's these other tools like Creo where you can draw like some rough painted thing and it'll try to convert that into an image with a prompt. That's better. And then I started seeing him use Comfy UI. And if you're listening, you don't know what that is. It's a node-based AI tool that has like 50 or more AI models you can load in and string them together like a Nuke script or a Fusion script or an Espresso node setup. And then you can mix that with like traditional tools like cropping and levels and alpha mats and compositing and other things. And you can build out, it's a compositing tool, but it has AI models built into it that can then take inputs from the other nodes and output to different nodes and split them. And so I was like, wow, okay, this is way more powerful, way more controllable. There's still a slot machine aspect to it. But this guy's a visual effects artist. He knows traditionally how to do this stuff. He's just doing this faster now.
A great model that I look at are even just online creators and online creatives who are dabbling in their own, making their own short films or pieces of content out there. They have this mindset or this approach, and half the time I can never tell if it's like an industry veteran or a 15-year-old kid sitting in their basement, but they have this approach where it's just like whatever it takes to get the job done, using wherever they're shooting things with an iPhone or mixing in AI animation tools or video, generative video processes or whatnot, and generative sound and music and voice. And they're combining all of those things and doing just sort of whatever it takes to get their vision out there. I think that's going to be an increasingly important approach for motion designers that may also mean abandoning typical pipelines or workflows that sometimes I think we can get a little too comfortable with.
And he has taste, so he knows when it's not good and he doesn't post that on the internet. So everything he's posting at least looks pretty darn good. And when he shows you how he made it, you're like, oh, I actually could imagine using that technique for stuff I do. And so that's why I wanted to give him a shout out, because he's kind of really on the cutting edge of that stuff. Our friends at Curious Refuge do a lot of that stuff too. I think they're a little bit more consumer focused in their marketing, so they focus mostly on the simpler stuff. But there's tools like Comfy UI, Weavy, and Project Graph we'll talk about, where if you already have these technical skills and you know visual effects, you know compositing, now you have 100 times the control you had with just like a text box that you're typing into and then saying, no, try again, but make it this way, So I thought that was really cool. And then the last one, Aaron already mentioned, is Meat Department. And I discovered them because there's this metal band from Italy or France, I can't remember. They're called Igor with like 3 R's. And they put out the weirdest music video I've seen in years. And I was like, I need to know who did this. Because you could tell it's a combination of 3D and AI, but you almost can't tell which is which. And it's one of those things where, like I said before, it's hard to make visuals that repulse you or make you think, oh, that's cute. It's like not easy to do that. It takes a lot of nuance, and they nail it. They've got this weird tone throughout the whole thing, and it's very technical. And then I went and looked, and then our own told me, oh, you should check out this other thing, that the car chase opener. And they have some amazing work, and they're awesome 3D studio, but they're also now messing around with AI and trying to figure out how can we push the things we're good at to even weirder levels using AI. They're leaning into the weirdness of it, which I think is the way to go until you have the control to actually make it not weird and good, which I think we're actually pretty close. So those were my 3 picks. EJ, who are yours?
Yeah, so I'm kicking things off with an individual who I actually had the pleasure of meeting a few years ago in London. His name is Yat Fung Lung, and he goes by Yatty the Man, and he is the man, I would say, when it comes to, again, like a lot of my stuff, like I'm just always attracted to just how stylized can you make things. And I think that's, if we want to talk about what makes you stand out in the age of AI too, it's not the things, the effects and the looks that go towards the median, because that's all what AI is. It's just, what's the average of all the crap that's out there? That's what AI is. That's the result. So Yatty's really interesting because he's got this really cool 2D style, but he does it in 3D, and he really pushes the whole kind of toon look. I asked him, like, how the hell do you get this really unique look and these reflections and like toon reflections? And he had this really ingenious thing where he's basically, it's just way simple. He's getting these crazy stylized reflections because he's using just these very stylized HDRs images. So he's just like blocks of color and with gradients, and those are his HDR images that he's using for some of these reflections on these 3D objects. And so he just really, like, his style is just so unique. He does all types of different work too. He's a great example of just what a 2D artist can do as far as like pushing the stylized stuff. He also just did a new short film, which, he said it was like self-indulgent. It's all about like saving files and stuff and what happens when you don't. And this little like floppy disk character going around and dealing with errors and stuff. And one of the things that I liked about this too is he was very honest about what he was going through at the time. He said he was, he found himself burnt out, and he ended up just doing this self-indulgent project, and through it, like, kind of found his joy for animating again. And I feel like I'm more and more like going to these conferences and speaking at these conferences. I feel like people are feeling that burnout and just not knowing what to do. And I think what, Yatty did was he kind of like just started creating for himself again. I feel like a lot of us don't do that anymore and kind of lose the thread of like, why did I get into this industry to begin with? So I just thought his message there, even though it's like a secondary thing, was really cool. And the short film's great. His new reel's great. Another thing that I found interesting too is, again, he's a traditional motion designer type of person. He's working on his own like indie game using Godot. And I'm just seeing like, oh, these are all like kind of they look almost like an 8-bit thing or 16-bit thing that you would make in After Effects, but he's programming it, and it's all the motion and all that taste coming from animating things by hand that he's applying to this indie game that he's working on, and the mechanics and figuring that stuff out. So it's just interesting how, we talk about blurring the lines of what is motion design and what can a traditional motion designer do in this day and age where you can learn Rive, and in a month or so you're building an app for a phone. So yeah, Yatty, super cool. Check him out. Again, with the whole theme of stylization. So some things awry. We talk about like viral VFX kind of stuff. So one of the guys who created this studio, his name's Chris Theron. And he does a lot of really cool like viral VFX on his Instagram, so check that out. But they just came out with his studio called Something's Awry, and they just did a project, I think in collaboration with Maxon. So just super stylized and just looks great. And one of the things that, because when I immediately saw him, like, oh, this has got to be Blender. Just because, again, I think we'll talk about this a little later on. It's the perception, right? Like if I see something this stylized and this kind of toony, cartoony kind of stuff and anime-ish style, my mind immediately goes to Blender because that's all I see Blender artists kind of doing. And that's the thing that I'm like, oh, that looks really cool. So I thought this was this kind of, again, if people are thinking that, you know, oh, if I want to do this specific look, I have to learn tool X. Well, not necessarily. And I think that's just the thing where it's like, once people show you what's possible with it, with the tools that are using, we talk about, Seth's film. I think people need to show what's possible to give permission for people to even like have the confidence of like, oh yes, I can do that specific thing with the tools that I use, and I don't have to learn something else. So I just thought that was really cool. They did a bunch of ZBrush characters as well. Really cool character design.
I want to just talk about that for a second because you really made me think about something here with there's like this idea of what After Effects can do or what Cinema 4D can do, and a lot of it comes from the tastemakers that, the taste and whatnot, right? Mm-hmm. So you talk about Grayscale Gorilla, right? A certain look that they've sort of really helped strengthen in the world of Cinema 4D, or that Andrew Kramer had his look. I think it's like we get in our heads that the tools do these things because a lot of the work follows these trainers or these people who are setting some taste within our, within the learning community. We all start to believe that that's the only way it can be done. Not that those ways aren't cool because they look beautiful, but they're also like very specific. And you can see someone who's been a student of Andrew Kramer, like their stuff tends to, flow that way. And Grayscale Gorilla, same thing. And I think that you're right. Like when they do something using those tools and they break away from what is commonly expected of it, your reaction of thinking it's Blender is like totally the reaction that you expect to have because like you don't see people doing it. And so there's a certain braveness in sort of taking the time to sort of go down that path and see what's even possible and then to put it out there. And of course we're in a day where you put something out and you have to worry that everyone thinks you're using AI. They're like, hey, did you use AI for that? You know what I mean? Like, right. So like the tools, like it's just a question of what's even being used. But you're right. Looking at his work again, those colors, they pop. They're so strong, and you just don't expect that to be from this sort of like world of motion design that's maybe a little more sophisticated that comes in the Cinema 4D world in terms of color and whatnot. But it's still beautiful.
Yeah, and he also did some really cool mocap too. Again, like I always love, like I love when studios or individuals take the time to show the behind the scenes stuff because that's not easy. That's extra work. Like a lot of extra work. And so they also did the compositing in After Effects. So it's like people are still compositing 3D in After Effects. Like, people aren't just getting it all in camera and stuff like that. So, I really enjoyed that piece just because of, again, I think it speaks to one of the bigger points of, what we'll probably talk about later on of just like perception and what's the truth. And do I have to worry that the tools or the tool sets and the disciplines and the fundamentals that I currently know, do I need to feel insecure about like, do I need to learn more? Do I need to learn X to achieve Y? Or do I have everything I need and I just need to kind of focus it? And I feel like this studio is on my list every year. I can't help myself because they just keep making just such cool crap all the time. So already been chewed. I feel like this is just recency bias. Well, not recency biased. Like every month they're coming out with some amazing new, motion piece that's just like, oh my God, whether it's like a shoe and they did like the Nike 3D printed shoe ad that just looked amazing earlier. I think that was earlier this year. But one of the things that's making the rounds now is all the work they've done, already been chewed, done with NFL teams, specifically the Ravens. Unfortunately, their really awesome motion graphics doesn't seem to be carrying over to their actual season because they're not doing so hot this year.
That's too bad. Yeah.
But what was really cool, there's a spot that I link where it's the Ravens like hype opener. And I remember like, cause I used to do sports graphics back in, the early 2010s. And man, the budgets sucked. It was very low budget and not great. So for me to see something this high level quality for like in arena graphics, this is just kind of like a whole nother level of just production value. And they did, I don't know if it was earlier this year or last year, they showed off some really cool like forced perspective stuff they did for the Cleveland Browns that looked really cool. But what I loved about this piece, the hype opener for the Ravens, was again, behind the scenes stuff, they showed how they did like practical effects. So it's this whole Edgar Allan Poe, and they're in this library and there's all these books and pages of the books flying around, and they did the behind the scenes of like how they actually use some practical effects too, where they're in this room and there's paper and stuff all over the ground and books, and there's just people physically throwing paper up in the air at the Ravens players, like Lamar Jackson, here's some paper in your face. So I just thought that was really cool. And it's something that like, I guess I didn't realize ABC did, was some of the practical VFX stuff too. But yeah, I just thought that, in the age where, you would think AI is used for everything, like people are still figuring out creative ways to achieve and solve certain problems. And sometimes it's, like the one piece I said where they actually had to manually rotoscope, like they still had to do that. Like where they found out the best way to achieve the certain effects to make it look integrated and real looking, was they needed to have some practical kind of stuff of actually throwing papers at some of the players. So I just absolutely love what Artie Ben-Chewd is doing, because they are more of that traditional MoGraph, motion graphics kind of studio, but just seeing where they are kind of expanding and getting into Houdini and Unreal Engine and getting into VFX stuff too. Like they didn't, I feel like they never did a lot of VFX stuff in the past, but I'm seeing it more and more, just, and it's just, they have taste. They're super talented. They have a staff that is like Transformers. They can transform into whatever type of team they need to do whatever task is at hand. So yeah, Artie Ben-Chewd. I'm sorry if I mention them every year, but they just continually are just killing it. So
you mentioned that thing about sometimes doing it practically is the best way, like even when you're doing like heavy 3D. Right. I was thinking, everyone knows about that thing with Avatar, when there's a shot that was in the trailer and everybody was trying to figure out what was done with water and like could be like. Right. And in the end, it turned out to be practical, and that they painted the person to look like the 3D character, even with subsurface scattering type lighting, because they knew it would be like at a specific angle, so that's what they would do. And so like they could not get it with the CG, so they just did it with practical, but with makeup, and, really just the lighting was right and everything. It's just funny that sometimes that's what you have to do to get that, look.
Yeah.
All right, Aaron, you're up.
I'm like super vanilla here. Here's the thing, like you go see a Pixar movie and you sit down. It's very rare that you're going to be disappointed, right? Like you're not going to necessarily be surprised by it anymore. Maybe the story's going to get you, but you're like, I once read a review of a Pixar movie that was like, ho hum, another brilliant movie from Pixar, right? Because like if they do anything bad, that's when you notice it, right? But even so, like I think about a lot of it was like my favorite studios was more like, who is still like in the game, right, in these crazy times, and like how are they surviving and doing really interesting work? And Territory Studio is to me one of the most interesting, because like Joe, you and I were talking about earlier, but like they diversified, right? They're doing print, they're doing everything, and they're still going really strong. They did Offs Barcelona closing titles this year, which were really nice and moody. They have an updated screen graphics reel for this year that's just incredible. It's just always like none of that that's what they're best known for, but even so, like it's always the next level stuff. And they did like the Esports World Cup graphics, which again was like motion design and not that was a move away. They were used to do the just the screen graphics, and now it's motion design. They even do visual effects work, but they're probably, their strongest is motion design and screen graphics. They've even done like real world user interfaces for, I forget which company, like which car company, but car company said like, hey, we want a really cool, user interface on our car. They entirely replaced the gauges and everything that you normally have that are physical with digital ones. but they wanted it to look super cool, and so they went to a company that already does the futuristic stuff, and so they're just doing a lot of cool stuff, and they're surviving. And I think that I'm never disappointed by their work, even if I can't stand some of the films that get made. Like there's the recent Jurassic Park. Their stuff is awesome.
You can't blame them for
They
Jurassic Park.
they can't be blamed. Like they're doing their best work, and it really elevates any project that they're involved with. It's just sometimes the projects just can't be.
Yeah, they also worked on Dune, right? So.
They did. Right? So that's the thing. It's. I think they do what they have to do, which is to go where the money's at. But you know what? I once was watching Confessions of a Shopaholic, and there is this crazy set of visual effects shots with the mannequins that hadn't been done before. And I looked up, and it was ILM, right? And I was talking to John Knoll, who he's the chief creative officer at ILM now, but back then he was visual effects. He was the head of visual effects, and he worked on Star Wars, all these things. And I'm like, why did you do that? And he goes, listen, sometimes these projects, which seem like they're nothing and no one's really going to even see comparatively, is a really good chance for us to test something that we think might be really useful on a much bigger picture, but it's a small opportunity to fail quietly, without people seeing. And if it works, it's great. Then we can take that over to a bigger film, and that's what they did. So sometimes these great things will be put into very small projects that that don't go big or that don't look great or whatever. And I don't worry about that. I think it's funny. It's hey, we needed to find a way to make something work. So we did it in a low stakes situation. So, good for them. Right.
I love that.
Yeah. So, the other one is another big one is Blur Studio. Their reel that just came out was insane. I mean, their stuff in general has always been, again, they've been around forever. I mean, forever is so hard to say in this industry. It's not that long. This industry's been around, but this past year they did Love, Death and Robots season 4 and Secret Level, which I really like Secret Level. Their reel is amazing. So I think just if you want to see some inspiring work that also makes you want to maybe get under your blanket and say, maybe I won't go into work today because I'm not going to make anything that good. It's a great opportunity to do that. And then finally, I really again, they just released a sort of semi-trailer for a new thing, but Leica Studios, they have a film coming out called Wildwood, and their trailer was really kind of a mix of all the other stuff that they've done, plus a tiny bit of this Wildwood project. But I love them because they have the most interesting process in 3D because it's stop motion, but they for example, they 3D print every frame of every face, and then they swap out the faces. So all of the facial animation is 3D printed, and so they have I think I was in Portland, and they had an exhibit on their stuff, and they had a wall full of all the faces of one of the characters, so you could see all the faces that went into every phoneme that the character said, every expression. Is pretty crazy. So they're doing a mix of very old school and very new school stuff, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've seen behind the scenes. They also have to composite out the seams with all of those faces. So there's actually a ton of just traditional visual effects in there too.
Yeah,
I mean they're masters.
Aaron, have you ever heard of Dwarf Studios and the Pokemon Concierge on Netflix?
No.
So it's another studio in Japan, but they did the same thing where they do the 3D printing of the faces and stuff and the stop motion. So yeah, if you want to get into more stop motion kind of stuff, Dwarf Studios is really cool to check out.
Maybe that'll make it in the show notes, and I'll find the link.
Yeah, and the Pokemon, check out
Pokemon
Pokemon Concierge. It just came out with season 2 on Netflix just recently. So
one thing that's interesting about Leica, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later too, is there seems to be, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but recently there was this Apple ident that now plays in front of all their shows, and you look at it and you're like, oh, that's pretty. And, you would never even think twice about it, except that it turns out they practically shot it somehow. And there's this behind the scenes of them, actually building the Apple logo out of plexiglass and shining different colored lights on it and shooting it. And then Stripe just did this thing for their Black Friday. They always put up a website so you can track, how many trillions of dollars are being spent on Black Friday. But they made this website where it was a practical miniature set that they built and then composited real-time analytics on that you could scroll around and see how many credit card charges there are that minute, but it's on the side of a building that's actually a miniature. And then they did a whole bunch of press about that. And, my gut is that maybe that's a little bit of a response to they could just use AI to make that. And so now it's no, we're actually putting a lot of work and effort into this, and that's part of the story now too. And that's almost part of the value of the piece. I'm curious how you think that may or may not tie into Leica.
Well, I think, with Leica, I think that Apple, we're going to forget in like 2 years from now that was ever like done with practical. But Leica's stuff, we're going to look at and always be like, that's just beautiful. And like that's unique and can't be done in the normal traditional way. There's got to be aspects of it that are mixed in some interesting way that we haven't, that we don't know, or that makes you want to explore it. I'm going to look at that Apple logo in 2 years, and someone else might see it for the first time, whatever, and be like, oh, that's cool. But they're not going to want to know how it was made. So I think, the Apple response, I think, was to a lot of this very this push towards, there's just too much of the AI and the CG, and like they wanted to try something different. But I think Leica's stuff is a combination of wanting to have it look its best, and people who are just into physical, tactile craft of making things. So, it's a little bit of everything there.
All right, beautiful. Well, you guys had good picks this year, and even though your picks were all like studios that have been around forever, Aaron, I thought it was actually a really nice way to look at it. Like who's still around that's like been able to maintain the quality after all these years? I mean, that's super difficult too, right?
Yeah.
That's not easy at all. All right, so now we're gonna get into some nerdy stuff. We're gonna talk about software, and good Lord, this has to be the longest software section outline we've ever had. It just goes on and on and on. So we'll try to blast through this. But I wanted to start with the big dog, with Adobe. And before we get into the software side of Adobe, I wanted both of your takes on this. So there's, I try to insulate myself from this because I think a lot of times it's misguided or it's just easy to jump on a bandwagon. And I don't want to do that. I wanted to always try to have like a really objective view. There's always like some Adobe haters out there and people complaining about this and that. But this year they have another piece of ammo, which is Adobe's stock price is tanked. It's down like almost 30% this year. And there's a whole lot of theories about that. And I've seen a lot of people, on X and LinkedIn and other sites like that. Especially you've got more apps now. You've got Blender, you've got Cavalry, you've got Rive, you've got all these kind of competitors. And I think I know the answer to this. So Aaron, why don't I just ask you this? Like, is Adobe in trouble at all? Like, their stock price is down. Brand sentiment might not be at an all-time high. People are talking about it online. What's your take?
I want to ask just a quick question to you. Is when did their stock, was it like slowly over the course of the year, or was there like a particular time where it dropped?
It's been, I think there was kind of a steeper decline in the first half of the year, but it's been steadily down pretty much since then.
I mean, do I think they're in trouble? They're such a juggernaut. Like, they'll find ways to fix that. Like that, I think long term, they're fine. I think more of like, what does it say for them? I don't know. Like, there's obviously this, like, look, there's a lot of AI going into their stuff. It's funny because in a lot of ways, AI should just be boosting their stock, right? Like, AI is the thing right now. There's AI, and I think the next thing is going to be quantum computing, which is like a whole other, like, that's like you're looking the next thing to invest in or whatever. Like, but AI, like all these companies are investing in it. But I don't know. With Adobe, I got to be honest with you, man. You said you thought I know what I was going to say. Maybe you should tell me what you thought I was going to say, because I don't really know. They're doing so much.
Yeah.
And it's in a lot of ways, like, I watched their last, Adobe, the Adobe Max, and I felt like an outsider in a lot of ways trying to keep up with all the crazy shit that they're doing there. Like, there's just so much happening and so little that has to do with things I would have normally done. Right. Used to say, people used to say to me, why does After Effects get so little attention? And I'm like, because they make all their money from Photoshop and Acrobat. They don't, everything else is just set dressing. Right. I mean, but now they have Adobe. By the way, I think it's possible that Adobe Marketing Cloud may have had a lot to do with that, less the creative apps, but it's possible that there's a lot of competition in the marketing area, which is something that Adobe has invested in heavily. So it may have nothing to do with the software, and it may have everything to do with this whole other area of the company that we as creative people do not have anything to do with. So I'm not sure. What did you think I was going to say?
I assumed you, so I'll tell you my take, and then EJ, you can chime in. Like, my take is that I've kind of felt this way, and then I kind of did some homework, and there's people that analyze stocks and companies and stuff, and this seems to be at least one consensus out of many, is that right now, AI is the thing that's being hyped, and that's where all the investor money is going, right? Including institutional investors, right? They want to invest in NVIDIA and Meta and Google and companies like this. And so Adobe, in one sense, is kind of a leader there because they really are the 600-pound gorilla in the creative software space, and they've invested heavily in AI. I think they possibly made a misstep, which was going in on this ethical Firefly AI model a little too early. And we'll talk about that when we get to the AI section. And so the results they've actually been able to drive, apparently Firefly adoption has not been great. They haven't really been able to monetize it. And as we'll talk about, they're now letting you use pretty much any model inside of Firefly. You can use Nano Banana inside of it, even after everything they said about ethical AI and all that kind of stuff. And so that like kind of creates this illusion that, Adobe has stumbled. If you look at the fundamentals of their business, their revenue's at an all-time high. They're super profitable. You know, they are so entrenched. It will be damn near impossible to dislodge them.
Yeah, and they can recover from, like, if they're giving people access to the different models, that's something to easily recover from. Because it's not like people said, well, I'm canceling my subscription to Photoshop because I've been using it for years and I'm not going to use it anymore, you know, because it doesn't have all the other models. I think that, you know, if anything, people just went out and bought like access to Midjourney or whatever and then brought that stuff into Photoshop. So, you know.
I assume that like investors, you know, and we're going to talk a lot about this, like they're not artists and they're certainly not professional artists who know the ins and outs of these tools. And so when they see a gorgeous still image on Midjourney, or they see like a 5-second video clip that looks pretty real, and they know that Adobe has something to do with that, but it's like the old way, they assume, Adobe's in trouble. But when you really get down to it and people are paying you to produce creative work, you're using Adobe. Like, you know, like it's pretty hard. I mean, it's getting easier not to, but it's still almost impossible to avoid it. So my take is Adobe is fine, and probably it's a good time to buy Adobe stock, honestly. I'm not a stock advisor. This is not stock picking advice, but
anything about quantum computing, I would not take that. Like, I would not put your 401k into it. I'm just, you know.
Yeah, but I'm curious, EJ, what you think, because like, you know, I know you're more tapped into like the zeitgeist of like the artist community and how they feel about AI. And I know that there's ups and downs to that. And a lot of that negativity gets aimed at Adobe because they're very publicly like all in on AI. Like at Adobe Max this year, that's all they talked about was AI. There was really, I don't think anything that was not AI related. So I'm curious what you were hearing, what you think.
I mean, well, if you know, Figma also their stock tanked too, and you know, you have Affinity now as well, which I don't even know if we mentioned Affinity on this whole thing, but you know, that's free. So I think it's just the sentiment out there is just anti-establishment, whether that's, you know, Cinema 4, you know, Maxon, anything you have to pay for. You know, people seem to be struggling. People want to cut costs, so they're gonna want to go towards the cheaper option. And I mean, Adobe is, you know, the other thing throughout this all is that Adobe is becoming more expensive due to all the AI stuff. So if you're a traditional motion designer and you're not using any of this AI stuff, you're paying for it whether you like it or not. And so I think there's a lot of people that don't appreciate that. Now, I will say, one of the other issues I think Adobe does have, and something that I think they're realizing now, is that their Firefly model just sucks. Like it's not good. It's like 2 years behind at least of all the other models. So I think the smartest thing they've done was allowed you to use these other models, like the Nano Banana stuff. Like I started using that, and I've seen, you know, people like that work for Adobe, like you know, Wes McDermott and you know, some of the other folks over at Adobe. They're really showing off some really cool stuff, especially with some of the Max Sneaks kind of stuff. But one of the things that I've been using Adobe stuff for recently is the Firefly boards, just for brainstorming. And I just found it a much nicer way. It's kind of like a Milanote for using AI in that Milanote kind of thing, where you can kind of plug things together, group things, build your storyboards or your mood boards, and remix images together. And I think that's one of the best ways, one of the most practical ways to use it right now. But I think one of the issues is even still now, where it's outside of people editing photos, like no one's using it for any animated stuff, I would say, or video. Like we've seen some of your experiments, Joey, with like the generative extend and Premiere, and you just get like a cobweb in your mouth all of a sudden. It's like, what the hell is that?
You know, it's funny because EJ with with Firefly, the way that I've tried to describe to somebody, they're like, well, what's the difference of like ethically trained versus not? I'm like, well, when you ask Midjourney to make a picture of Spider-Man, it makes a picture of Spider-Man. But when you ask Adobe Firefly, it's like, I don't know what Spider-Man is. I once heard a guy talk about it. We were in a bar and the volume on the TV was really loud, but I think I got the gist of it.
Yeah.
And it did not get the gist of it, not even a little.
Well, what's the difference is it's got a fraction of the training data that any of the other AI models do, and so they're always going to be like. I think what Firefly, what Adobe's trying to do is admirable, but I just think to stay ahead, it's just really rough. But I think even the Firefly stuff where it's commercially safe, this is one of the things that, we had PJ Richardson from Laundry do one of the workshops for our community here, a few months ago. And one of the things that I went away with was the fact that like they're working on stuff for certain companies that will not allow them to use AI for the final output. Like it's got to be integrated somehow, but it can't be used for a final product. So there are still like these big companies, they still are afraid of how you're using AI in the end result. And so that's one of the things where it's like, I don't do client work. I don't do I don't work with any companies that would either need AI or be okay with using AI or not. So I think that's the one aspect where I'm just like, how is that going to shake out? Because, if there's some ruling that comes down the pike and all of a sudden, like, Buck used AI in some way for Google and Google's getting sued and somehow, like, I just don't know what the ramifications of that is. And I don't know what hesitancy there is with like artists, individual or clients on just the legal aspect of it, because I know there's the moral thing and I understand that, but the legal stuff seems like very, very murky and people are just using AI left and right, and the legal aspect of it just doesn't seem to be talked about much at all. So
I think, by the way, you're right that like it doesn't matter that Adobe's even though Adobe's doing it ethically with Firefly, the idea that someone is using AI, whether it's ethical or not, nobody even wants to deal with. Like, the people that don't want to deal with AI don't want to have to play with it. Like, you could say you use Adobe, but they're never gonna have to deal with it if it's a problem later. I think they'd rather just stay away from AI than use AI. And if they're using AI, they're not asking questions. That's where I think it's gotten to.
Yeah, we'll talk about this in the AI section. I'm skeptical that there's that many companies still doing that, and if there are, then because 100% of the people I talk to, studios, agencies, artists, are all using AI.
Yeah.
Like it's not 90%, it's 100%.
I think, by the way,
and they're doing it for somebody.
I think we're talking a lot about it, and we haven't sort of like really talked about it, right? So we're sort of like keep mentioning it, and I think people who are sort of sitting there and are unhappy with AI, like we're gonna have a conversation about it, because what you think is happening and what's actually happening are very, very different in the industry. People are being very quiet about it, but it's on, man. It's on right now.
Yeah, it's on like Donkey Kong, as they say. All right, we're going to talk about the old tools, right? The traditional quaint ones where you have to use a mouse and click and stuff. All right, so real quick, Photoshop. Basically everything. I would say After Effects is almost an outlier in the Adobe ecosystem, where the After Effects team shipped a ton of stuff this year that wasn't AI related and is actually really useful. But we'll start with Photoshop. Photoshop has integrated AI, I think, the best of any creative tool. And it's not even close. It's using it now for object selection and creating super detailed, really crisp, clean mattes for things. It's funny. I remember one of the first tutorials I ever made for School of Motion over a decade ago was how to cut out difficult things in Photoshop. You don't need to watch that. Like, it's literally a click, and then if it's really tricky, maybe you got to clean it up a little bit with like some brush tools. But it's almost there it's getting bicycle spokes perfectly. It's insane how good that's gotten. There's the Harmonize tool. I don't know if either of you have played with that, but it's very cool. It's not perfect, but basically you can, take one image and put it on top of another and kind of position it where you want it and click Harmonize, and it composites it for you. And it'll add a contact shadow, and if there's lighting in your background, it'll add a shadow for that. And it'll color correct it to try to match, and it can kind of relight it a little bit. And it gives you 3 options, and you pick the one that you like the best. That's kind of amazing. Now, it's not... I don't think it's as good as like a really experienced compositor that really knows what they're doing, but it's like 80% good enough. Like, it's, again, this is going to be another theme, is like, for a lot of things, 80% good enough is good enough, and Harmonize is pretty much there, I think. Oh, actually, this is a non-AI thing. They shipped this cool tool. It's called Dynamic Text, where you can have a block of text with multiple lines, and it'll scale up the typeface for each line so that you get this nice left-right justified block of text, which isn't really that hard to do if you don't have that tool, but it is nice that, kind of saves you a few clicks. I think it's actually funny if you think about it. We're teaching a cavalry class now, and stuff like that you can just do like natively in Cavalry, and you can control it however you want. But when Photoshop added that, it was a big press release. Like, it was like a big feature thing. So it's nice though. The biggest thing, obviously, in Photoshop is the AI stuff. Specifically, I think the biggest news there is them opening up Photoshop to now not just use Firefly, but use Nano Banana and other models. You can now also use Topaz Labs for upresing. Firefly has an upresing model, and it sucks. It's just not good. Topaz is my second favorite one. That Magnific is the best one, but they don't have that one in Photoshop.
Joey, if you have a license of Topaz, does that work with that, or do you have to pay credits for that?
No, because Topaz, you can buy your own. I think you can buy Topaz as like a perpetual license that can run on your machine, actually. So you can just use that if you have it. But if you're using it through Photoshop, you have to use AI credits. And that brings me to, this is kind of related to everything around AIs. It's not just Adobe, but a lot of these companies, most of them, the way you have to use AI right now is with a credit system. And this sucks. This is objectively crappy. So when you use a Firefly tool in Photoshop, it's dinging you for credits. And depending on which Adobe plan you have, maybe you have some credits, but it's not clear how much those credits are. Like Harmonize apparently costs some credits. I don't know how many. Does it matter like how many pixels are in it? Is it just a flat rate? If you're using Firefly, it uses some credits. If you're using Nano Banana, it's more because Adobe is probably paying Google like to use their model, right? So then probably marking it up.
I think that what they do is there's actually a lower cost because they're not using their some of their overhead. There's like the API. If you look on their pricing, there's API credits cheaper usually than the using it on Google's site, for example, and their whole environment. So I know that with. I noticed that with a couple of models I was looking at yesterday just to see like what the costs were, and as someone said, look at the API thing, you'll see that the prices are cheaper. So I think that if you're not, if you're using their overhead, there is a decrease in the price, but for them, you're still going to pay because like you're now using their thing, you're paying them, but like I think they don't pay, they pay less to use. They're also buying.
Yeah. Well, and they're Adobe, and they're making an enterprise deal with Google, and I'm sure they're getting like a bulk discount. But in any case, Piximperfect, like the Photoshop guy on YouTube, he's incredible. He did a whole video about this and talked about this credit system, and I think that it's really going to hurt adoption of these tools until this gets turned into something that's like one price, all you can eat, which I don't think is really financially viable.
I don't even think, Joey, I don't even think any of it's financially viable right now. I don't think, like, is anyone really making money? Like, are they burning money right now as they try to get to some kind of finish line? I'm not clear on whether the companies are actually making money, with any of this so much as like.
I'll tell you in a little bit, Aaron. I will tell. Yeah. That's called a tease. I mean, honestly, like I think last year, I can't remember if it was during this podcast or a different one, but I talked about the AI bubble. I think it was during our end of the year podcast. And the bubble I was referring to was the financial bubble around AI. OpenAI is still burning billions of dollars. Photoshop, Adobe, I assume, actually, I'm pretty sure they're not making money on Firefly right now. They're losing money on it, probably a lot. They can afford to. Google is losing money on AI, but they have a different business model where they can support that. Same with Meta, right? So Adobe eventually will have to make money with AI, and maybe that'll just trickle into more Creative Cloud subscribers. But the user experience of it right now isn't great. It is very useful to have Nano Banana right inside of Photoshop. It's pretty cool. I think the integration's okay. It could be a lot better. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, for Photoshop, I think most of the stuff that they added was AI, except for dynamic text. It's still, we still use Photoshop every day at School of Motion. I mean, it's the standard thing. Now with Affinity, which we'll talk about, that could be interesting. The other thing is Illustrator, and I don't use Illustrator as much as Photoshop. EJ, I think you use Illustrator still. And really the two big things I saw was it got a lot faster and the turntable tool looks really cool. Have you used
the turntable thing looks really interesting. It's one of those things where it's like 60% of the time it works every time. You get some weird stuff, but the Mac Sneaks. So previously the turntable, you could only do like 45-degree chunks and like overhead, but with turntable, or with the newest version of turntable, I don't know what's coming out, but it was teased at Adobe Max. You can get a lot more different degrees of rotation on your 2D vector image, that's super interesting because you can change things. You have a lot more control over things as well. The one thing I wish it could do, so the only downside is when you have your, stroked paths or whatever, and you do turntable, it just expands your paths and your shapes. So it's very hard to like edit it if you wanted to edit it, because if you had a stroke on it, it's just expanded. So I hope they do it in a way where if you have a stroke around something and you do the turntable, it maintains that, because then it's, everything about this AI stuff is it art directable? If it is, then it's super useful. But if it's destructive in any way or it's hard to edit, that's where things get a little tricky. But turntable seems to be the big thing. I don't know how helpful it is or how much it's being used in practice right now, but it's again, one of these AI things. It's like, it's cool. I don't know if people are going to actually find use out of this though. And like,
it's a great tech demo, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what? I was talking to Hashi this morning, and he said to me that like his reaction to all this stuff, and that's what our reaction should be. Instead of having these very extreme emotional reactions to sometimes when people show something really cool, and then you're like, it's ethical. You're like, just go, neat. That's awesome, thanks. Because like show me something real, like that's more than 3 seconds long, that looks good and it's consistent, and then that does this thing like that we can use practically, and it's being used in a real project. Then I'll be like, oh, that's cool. But for now, it's like, yep, neat, neato. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that with a lot of these tools, the way that they're positioned, right? Like turntable is positioned as you can have a vector image, and now you get a 3D, almost like a vector 3D model of it, right? And so the implication is that you can use it in the same way you would use a 3D model, right? But it's not good enough to do that in most cases, and frankly, the way it outputs it isn't. You don't actually get a 3D model. But if you have a vector of a tree and you want a variation to make your composition have a little more of that, you can now get instant, easy variations of it. That's not what the tool was necessarily designed to do, but it is good at that. I think there's going to be a lot of retraining our brains of like, how would I do this without this tool? How could I do it with this tool? How do I hack this tool? I mean, a lot of what After Effects artists do is they hack After Effects to do things that it wasn't really designed to do. Fractal noise was probably put in there because it's a very useful visual effects tool, but we figured out all kinds of ways to get like stylized things with it and, boil edges and things like that. So I think it's going to be the same with AI. You're going to take a tool called turntable, but you're going to use it as the variation.
Or Joey, I think someone at Adobe was just like, "Ooh, that's a good idea." They may have like variation tools coming soon with AI that like will take common objects like trees and things like that you need variations on and just do it. Like there's some value in that for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially with a lot of the modern projects people have, right? We need 700 different emojis and they all kind of look the same, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, AI actually can save a lot of time with that. All right, now let's move on to After Effects. And we asked Eran, one of our newest After Effects instructors, to weigh in on this. And he agreed pretty much with what I thought, which was, there's kind of a big deal, which is that there's not really a RAM preview anymore. When you hit the RAM preview button, which is what I'm going to call it for the rest of my life because I can't not say it. When you hit RAM preview, it's actually previewing to your hard drive now. And so you can basically have unlimited playback, which, it's funny because like that's a big deal for After Effects artists that are working on like 4K, 8K stuff, that don't have 256 gigs of RAM. It seems like it should have been probably table stakes by 2025, but now we have it. So that's really helpful. What I like is that the After Effects team added like some really nice quality of life things this year, like native layer staggering. Like you can select a bunch of layers in your timeline and you can stagger them really easily now. You don't need like a third-party tool to do that. Skew is a third-party tool that still like gives you way more options and is nicer to use, and I still recommend that for most people if they're going to be doing that a lot. But now it's native in After Effects. The biggest thing is obviously the 3D system.
Hey, I'm Eran Stern, one of the co-hosts of the very first After Effects video podcast, together with Aaron Obinovich and a guy you might have heard of, Andrew Kramer. I think 3D is mandatory for anyone in this field, but it's also a very deep pool that takes time to master. So the fact that we can now import native 3D models with animation cameras and lights into a familiar environment like After Effects, to me, is a game changer. I also love the fact that Adobe keeps pushing this forward, especially with the Substance tools that we got in the recent beta. Things like parametric materials and 3D primitives, they're just great. Now, is it ready for prime time? Probably no. It's still evolving, but the direction looks very solid. Now, beyond 3D, which I'm sure we'll geek out more in this episode, I'm really a big fan of the quick offset for layers and keyframes and the dynamic zoom feature, which, by the way, took years to develop, and it didn't get enough love, at least not the love it deserves. So I made a whole tutorial about it. Like and subscribe. There were also some little things that mattered too. For example, reveal project file, copy and paste text formatting, high performance preview playback, customize the transparency grid, maintain your workspace when you opening projects from other people, as well as control multiple 3D objects with a single gizmo. And of course, the new commands for creating nulls from points. Those are great stuff, and some of them are not so small, like the ability, for example, to run preview forever without robbing a bank. And yes, I know there are still things to do, but I think they are doing it. The obvious ones are depth of field and motion blur for the advanced 3D renderer. Also, being able to apply substance materials to extruded text and shape layers just seems logical to me. But what I'm really hoping for are 3D splines, and that would be a total game changer for After Effects. I also like to see shape layer operators work on those 3D primitives. Imagine if those meshes had the same mathematical operators like we have with shape layers, or even just the 3D repeater. That would be instantly through MoGraph style tools inside After Effects.
So have either of you messed around with the new 3D system in After Effects?
I have not.
I've brought in the animated characters and stuff previously, but it wasn't the latest version of it, so.
Yeah, so my take is when they first announced it and it first came out, I was like, I'm going to wait and see, because my assumption would be, like a lot of things with After Effects, it's an ancient program by software standards, and so to shoehorn in something as complicated as 3D, which requires a 3D renderer and a lighting system and a texture system, and how how much control are you going to have, and what kind of models are you supporting, and all those things. I have to say it's surprisingly good. It's very fast. The render quality is really high if you know what you're doing, right? So if you just throw a 3D model in there and put an After Effects light in there, and you don't know anything about lighting or render samples or shadow detail, like it's going to look grainy. It's not going to look good. But if you have some of those, if you have that knowledge from being a 3D artist, you can tweak all that stuff and get a pretty high quality 3D render that renders quickly, and it lives natively in After Effects with the rest of your scene. It's pretty awesome. You can bring in animated models. You can bring in FBXs now, OBJs, GLTFs, like a bunch of formats. Some of those formats have the materials built in. I don't know if this is shipped yet as of this recording. It may have, but now you can also bring in a substance material, apply it to the 3D object, and then tweak the substance material in After Effects. So you have to set it up in Substance first and tell it what properties you want to be able to change and stuff. But that's pretty cool.
Yeah. By the way, I think I want to just like come to this whole thing with Substance and with After Effects having 3D. 6 years ago when they acquired Substance, I got to say, like, I was completely baffled by that decision. Right? They acquired it. They didn't have any 3D programs, right, to speak of. And it seemed like a really random thing. I talked to my friend who's a CEO at a video game company, and he was like, well, you know what? He goes, truth is that we've moved very far away from using Photoshop. We were always using Photoshop as the tool to create textures, and now we're using Substance. And I was like, oh, maybe that makes sense. Maybe they didn't want to lose that market. But it's obvious that, like, they've started to think, you know, I don't know if they had 100% vision at the time that they bought it outside of that. But they're very clearly thinking about 3D now, which is funny because I think Maxon is thinking about, you know, the After Effects market. We'll talk about that a little later too.
Correct.
But you know, they're very clearly thinking about 3D in terms of motion design and motion graphics. So it's so like that purchase makes some sense now when it did not 6 years ago. Not really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, you know, the good thing about having 3D native in After Effects is like a lot of things that used to be really clunky. I mean, even just 3D type, right? I mean, if you think about how many third-party tools have come around over the years. I remember using Zaxworks Invigorator like decades ago to make 3D type or Element 3D. You know, you had the Cinema 4D renderer, but it was like, it was really slow. This is actually like a pretty great option. And I think that what's missing is the ability to do a little bit more animation inside of it with like rigs or, you know, or things that have multiple pieces. I think that would be helpful. I think, you know, more control over like some of the lighting settings to mimic 3D lights a little bit more. But overall, like if you're doing basic shape-mography stuff and you need like a 3D cube, they added primitives too recently. So now you've got cubes and spheres and stuff natively in After Effects. It's pretty awesome. Like I think that's probably the biggest thing they've added to After Effects in many, many years. And probably the most useful. And I think it's gonna be interesting because, you know, After Effects artists who are used to working in 2D, they're used to kind of faking all of that stuff, right? That's how I used to work a lot before I learned Cinema 4D. Was like, oh, I want it to feel 3D. That means I need a shadow and a little glare over here. And then, you know, you kind of learn the visual tells of this is 3D and you fake them. Well, you can't do that in 3D. You have to actually light the thing and put the shadow where you want, you know? You have some control with compositing, but not that much. And so I think it's going to hopefully get a lot more After Effects artists into 3D. And then when they hit the limitations of it, maybe they jump to Blender or Cinema 4D.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is like my brain like hurts when I see those complex rigs to just rotate a cube, and I'm like, oh my god, just make a cube and just rotate it. So, and I think that's the thing too, whereas a lot like Kyle Hamrick, for example, like I love him to death. And like when he used to work at School of Motion, he'd be like, I need to learn 3D. I was like, yes, you do. I was like, it's not that hard. Like, just let me sit you down. And so but I just think when you're in that 2D mind, like, yes, I think we all forget if you know 3D, you forget how daunting that was at first. And so I think if anything, yes, I think it's really big that if people are going to have an excuse to start learning 3D, and using it in their native app like After Effects, I think that's a huge win. And you just hope that this isn't yet another one of the 3D engines and stuff that Adobe has that then they trash and redo this all again. Because I remember, you know, is this the fourth different time you could do 3D text and shapes in After Effects? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, this iteration of 3D in After Effects, I think, is on the right track. And I love that the team is shipping. They shipped a lot this year. Like, it felt like the velocities increased. And, you know, the After Effects team, we've said it many times on this channel, like, very small. Like, it's not a huge team. But what's awesome is everyone on that team is like an After Effects nerd. Like, they love After Effects, and they're listening to the community. I think Victoria Nice is doing an awesome job. So, yeah, I was really happy about that. Iran really likes the 3D system. And they've added a whole bunch of other, like, little quality of life things around, like, fonts and variable fonts and stuff like that. A lot of that is in Iran's class. So then we get to Premiere, and we launched our first Premiere course this year. We will definitely have more taught by Kyle, who, like, probably should learn 3D, but honestly, like, he's such an expressions nerd. He'd probably rather build a mathematical system to, like, make a cube. I think it would tickle that part of his brain.
Hey, I'm Kyle Hamrick, a longtime motion designer, video creator, and teacher across several different formats. I kind of feel like 2025 was the year of Premiere. Adobe added a ton into it, and it really felt like it was their focus. We got Premiere for mobile, which appears to be replacing Rush. And hopefully that will be cool, both for, folks doing like more streamlined social cuts, but also folks can maybe use that on set to do edits, and then you can push it to the full desktop version to refine it. So I think that's useful. There are several AI focused features. I'll kind of get into all of those in a minute. Some of them don't seem like big headline features, but nice stuff like adding an Adobe stock panel directly into Premiere, so you can just browse for stock clips without leaving the app, and it doesn't need to be third party. That's great. There's a third-party creator called Film Impact that had been making a ton of great transitions and filters and stuff for Premiere, and they acquired that and integrated directly into Premiere this year. So a lot of those great stylized transitions that people like to use, especially for the flashy social edits, are all baked right in now, and people don't need to buy additional products. I think that's a good, CapCut competition. They're probably trying to lure some of that audience away a bit. Getting into some of those AI features, media intelligence, I think is really huge. That's one of those things that as an editor, I've been wanting for a long time. Basically, unless you turn it off, every time you import clips into Premiere, it's going to analyze them in the background and then kind of auto tag them for you. So you can use the search panel to look at all the footage in your project. And if you wanted to find that clip with that one specific thing that you were looking for, you can just search for that, and it will show you every piece of media that you've imported that has that thing. While it's not something I use a lot, being able to automatically translate captions into every language is really helpful. And they added improved color management so that if you don't already have an understanding of how to work with LUTs and raw footage and stuff, Premiere can do a lot of that for you. Now, as with most things, is it going to get you all the way? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the clip, but you're not starting from zero if you need the help. They added a ton of audio enhancements. I think some of these were actually last year as well, but this sounds a little silly, but one of my favorite things that we got, again, I think last year, is the ability to do crossfades much more easily, like you can in Audition. You can just drag from the end of the clip, and much easier than having to deal with the old way, and that's great. The enhanced speech feature is really nice too. Again, I think that was also from 2024, but sometimes people don't catch all of those. And you can tell there's been a big focus on making audio more usable. You could see a couple really amazing things in sneaks from this year where, for example, they brought in a clip and it just kind of magically extracts stems of all the different elements of a single audio file. So they were able to pull out background music and have that separate from the person speaking, and being able to filter that out or change it to something where that doesn't have licensing issues. That's pretty incredible. As someone who watches all the sneaks that they put out at Adobe Max, I think that's probably the easiest way to guess where things are going. Some of those audio features that they premiered this year just look absolutely incredible. And that seems like that's going to kind of revolutionize the way that we can work with audio in post. I think we're going to see continued development in object masking and whatever that turns into in After Effects, which is great because I don't think too many people are going to cry about rotoscoping disappearing. I don't think anyone loves that. And anything that helps you get rid of those tedious tasks like painting things out with cloning, that's stuff that these tools do pretty well and helps free us up from the tedious parts so that we can be more creative and make the thing that we want instead of spending days going frame by frame.
Premiere, we use Premiere at School of Motion. All three of our editors use it. I use it. I know like the two of you use Premiere. Honestly, it's a great editor. Like I don't really have anything bad to say about it. I've tried DaVinci Resolve. And it seems great too, but it's like going from C4D to Blender. Like the muscle memory is totally different, and I don't have time for it, despite the fact that one's free. But Premiere has added some really good stuff. So they added text-based editing, I believe, last year, but it's gotten better. I still prefer Descript for that stuff. If anyone's unfamiliar, it's a text-based video editor that transcribes every piece of footage you put in, then you edit it like a Google Doc, and it instantly makes the edits, and it's amazing. It's incredible. It's got AI built in, so it can also like tell you like what's the best soundbite from this interview, and it'll just give you 5, and it's awesome. So Premiere doesn't have all that yet, but it does have text-based editing, and that then gives you the opportunity to like make, captions automatically, right? So that unlocks a whole bunch of things. And now they've got this thing called media intelligence where it scans your footage. Apparently it does this locally somehow, and it can essentially tag your footage. So it knows this is a wide shot featuring, a male and a female human. Like it can kind of know that stuff. This is an exterior. This is an orange cat, right? This is someone stirring a bowl of porridge, whatever. I don't know why I used porridge as the example there. I've never actually had porridge, but kind of want some now. But yeah, so that's, to me, that is like, I'm not sure I can think of a better use of AI than that. That's amazing. Like I started my career as an assistant editor. I know what it's like to get 100 hours of footage, and you have to not just like log it all, you have to digitize it in with a tape deck. You kids don't even know how easy you have it. Yeah. There's also, and this is actually it's really good. It's really useful. They're using AI to enhance audio. So if you have a noisy audio clip with some wind, or the mic wasn't very good, so there's no low end, it's got these enhanced tools that you can mix in the amount you want, and they're really freaking good. They've gotten better. There's a really good roto tool now. It's called Object Mask. It has to make its way into After Effects at some point. Right now it's just Premiere. And it's like, from what I've seen, I'm used to using Boris FX's, I forget what they call it, the machine learning mat, I think is what they call it in Mocha, which is incredible. This looks just as good as that, and it's fast, and it's built right into Premiere. And you really, it just saves you a trip to After Effects. You don't need roto. You don't need the roto brush. I think for a lot of things, you're done with that one click.
You said
That's
it saves you a
awesome.
trip to After Effects where you would then have to do it by hand, right?
Exactly.
Because they don't have the tools in there.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the last thing, which I don't know how big of a deal this is, but Premiere for iPhone dropped, and I haven't played around with it. I don't really have much desire to edit on my iPhone. But I think that's kind of a sign of there's a big chasm between us old heads and younger kids coming up and how they think about making content and making video. And I know my kids are all CapCut fluent. They use it all the time. They know how to put titles in and add filters and sound effects and all this stuff. And so if you're coming up in that generation and all of a sudden you want to jump to a professional app, well, this is kind of a nice stepping stone. So that my gut is that's probably what the strategy is for Adobe, is just making it accessible. I know that some of their iPad apps are free, so I don't know if Premiere for iPhone is free. I probably should have checked before recording this, but I think that's kind of cool. But overall, Premiere I think is just still a workhorse powerhouse. Aaron, I know you edit everything in Premiere. I don't know if you've noticed anything new or cool about it this year.
I'm doing fairly simple stuff. I create my own problems, so because I'm making the content that I'm then editing, so I already know what the solutions are. Yeah. There have been a few times that I've used extended, the footage, and that's been okay because I know what kind of footage it works with, and I know what kind of footage it does not work with. I've definitely used the when you have a cut and you remove an and then you want to have the footage blend. I don't know why I can't remember the name of that feeture. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's so bizarre.
Morph cut.
Yeah, it's it can work or it cannot work. I don't know how sometimes how to predict stuff I think would work just doesn't. But but the extension of the footage, that can be pretty good. I think somebody did an experiment where they just kept extending it further and further. And the first few seconds it was good. Yeah. By the time it's done, 10 seconds, it's that typical hallucination of content,
Like a Tim Burton character. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Premiere is just, I think it's just kind of industry standard. When I talk to editors that use DaVinci Resolve, almost none of them use After
Right.
Effects. So I think that's
Yeah, if
that's
you're
really
using,
it. Like
if you're using After Effects and you're using Photoshop, you pretty much know the interface of Premiere. Some of the shortcuts are weirdly not the same as some of these other things, but I know, I get it. Like I get in there and it's the same environment. I'm not saying it's better, but I'm saying like I'm so familiar with the other stuff that this is easier to use than trying to use something that like has a completely different paradigm for how the tools work and all that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, from what I can tell, Resolve is, I mean, it has every feature Premiere has, and then some, and it's fast, and it's more modern. I mean, it's amazing. It's just it doesn't have, the instant back and forth with After Effects, right? It doesn't have dynamic link. And honestly, that's a deal breaker. Like you can't import a MOGRT file. It's got Fusion, and Fusion has a version of a MOGRT file. I forget what they call it. You can set that up, but it's a node-based compositing app. It's not a motion design tool. It's not a motion graphics tool. And I've gotten into YouTube arguments over this in the comments because I'm like, no, it's not a competitor to After Effects. It's not. And I guess that's one thing I didn't really say when we were talking about After Effects. As far as I can tell, there are still absolutely zero After Effects competitors.
I think that's going to change.
There is not one out there.
I think that's going to change soon.
Yeah.
That's a tease.
We'll see. We'll see. That's another tease.
Yeah.
So I've pretty much tried everything. Apple Motion, Cavalry, Lottie, Rive, Blender, Autograph, and even some of the big guns like Unreal, Nuke, Fusion, and Flame. And I can tell you, they all have something great to offer. More than just one thing. Some have fantastic type tools, some give you real-time playback, some have high-end compositing, node-based workflows, vector magic, or clever state machines. But none of them gives me what After Effects gives me. It is always was one of the two things. Either it's not powerful enough or it's not easy enough to learn and use out of the box the way After Effects was for me. The combination of simple, intuitive UX with almost ridiculous depth under the hood is still unmatched in my opinion. And that is before you even count the huge ecosystem of plugins, scripts, and extensions that I talked about before that wraps it all around. So I must stress, I'm not saying After Effects is the best app out there, but I'm arguing it's the best solution for motion graphics and for the things that I use it for. I also feel that the team at Adobe is genuinely pushing the app forward and making it better with each release. Is it perfect? No. There's always room for improvement, but it is still where I feel most at home and where I can be most creative.
All right, let's talk about Substance, and this is something I know very little about, so I'm gonna throw it to my boy EJ.
Yeah, so a lot of stuff with Substance, Designer, which I don't use a ton, but there's like a lot of cool stuff in there. Substance Painter got a lot of like quality of life updates. So if you use Substance Painter a lot, they added a ribbon tool, which is super cool, which allows you to stretch an image along a path. They updated their path tool to be able to actually fill a path, which is like a pretty big deal. It's like, imagine if you were an illustrator and you drew a path and you couldn't easily just fill it with a color. Anything like you couldn't do that before. So now you could do that, and you can do it with the mirror tool. There's so talking about integration with After Effects, there's real-time asset updates between, say, if you made a texture in Illustrator or something like that, like a vector logo. If you change the logo, it automatically update inside of Substance Painter, which is super cool. Sampler has better updates too, which is, if you're not familiar with the sampler, basically you can generate whatever kind of image pattern or something you want. If you shoot like a photo of grass, like just outside in your lawn, you can easily make a tileable texture. With Substance Painter, one of the biggest things was like doing all your mesh map baking, and you have to like adjust the, if you want to do low poly to, or high poly to low poly, baking in all the normal details and stuff like that. You used to have to manually create a cage around it and deal with like errors and stuff like that. Now they have an auto cage option, which makes things like super easy, super seamless. But as far as like Substance goes as a whole, if you want to try it out, they have a new indie bundle that came out a little bit earlier this year. So if you have Steam, you can get the indie bundle for Substance. I think it has Painter, Designer, and maybe Sampler, but it's all for $24.99 a month. So a little bit cheaper entry to get into the Substance tools if you just want to try that without getting the whole Creative Cloud kind of thing. So
Well, it's not even included as a part of the general
Nice.
Creative
Right, yeah,
Cloud
you have to do it
subscription,
separate.
right?
yeah.
So like, I mean, I wonder how long that'll be. I mean, right now it makes sense that they obviously thought when they first got it, it didn't make a lot of sense to include it because there was nowhere to use that stuff, right? But now that it's in After Effects,
Yep.
I don't know, maybe that'll change. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I'm curious, EJ, because you have a Substance course coming out. Like what, and you know Cinema 4D inside and out, and you're starting to learn a little bit of Blender. Like, what does Substance give you in terms of capabilities that you think is really cool?
One of the things that Blender can do that Cinema 4D is not great at is like actually making custom textures. So there's some procedural texturing things you can do in, say, like Redshift and in Blender, but if you really want to get in there into the nitty gritty and like paint on your model and grunge things up or add wear and tear to different aspects of your model, it's really hard, especially if you're trying to work light, especially if you want to get into games at all. Like, you have to learn Substance Painter just to get the high poly detail information onto a lower poly model and use all that information to generate effects on your models. But there's just so many. It's kind of like After Effects, where there's just so many effects and tools and just things that it's just quality of life that you can just do things so much easier. Like, you want Rust, like there's a Rust preset. Like, there's just so many cool presets. And like, if you want stitches for like, if you have cloth and you want to add stitches, you can just like use a path tool, and the path tool is like 3D, and it actually sticks to the curvature of your model, which is super cool. And you can't do that in Blender. You can't do that in Cinema. So there's just so many things that you just can't do, or if you wanted to do, it'd be super, super hard. So if you want any kind of like custom materials authoring, like it's really the go-to. And, learning it, really diving into it for the course, it's something where it's so easy to use that, and it's so easy to learn too. Like, if you know Photoshop, you're right at home. Like, it has the same exact kind of layer system and folder systems and adjustment layers and stuff like that. So it's so easy. It's ridiculously easy to pick up. So I think that's even one of the other benefits is just you can just plug it in really easily to your workflow and massively increase what you can do to your textures in 3D.
EJ, I don't know if you ever saw Quixel Mixer. It's already like it's been depreciated. You can still download it and use it. I tried learning both Quixel Mixer, and this is before I was even using Unreal. I tried using Quixel Mixer and also like Substance. And Substance obviously is an order of magnitude much more complex and deep, and not like in a way that's not even approachable. It's just like it's meant for like really for there's a lot in there. Quixel Mixer had a lot of some of these features that you're talking about. Like, you'd bring the model and you could paint to do stuff. It was easy. You could mix textures, materials, all this stuff. It's a bummer that it's not there because it's like a really light version of that if you were trying to get your feet wet in this stuff and you wanted to do. But like, I still play with it every once in a while. I get curvature maps out of it, which is something that like much harder to do in other places. So like, I don't know how curvatures are handled by Substance, but it sounds like it's like obviously right up its alley too.
Yeah, so there's so many things that you can use, like your curvature, your ambient occlusion, your normals, your even world space to drive different effects. So if you want like weathering, but you only want weathering on the bottom side of your model, like, okay, well, you use like the -y vector, world vector kind of setup and stuff like that. So there's just, it's one of those things where it's so easy to get into, but then half of it's just like learning all the presets and all the effects and just how you can combine them together. It's like Photoshop, or like I said, it's like After Effects or Photoshop. It's like, you have your posterize and your whatever, and then you mix all those things together and you're like, wow, that was a really cool like warp effect, like Star Wars warp effect or something like that.
You got to learn the recipes. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the recipes. Yeah, that's exactly it. And there's so many effects and layer stacks and different ways to do the same thing. And yeah, the presets are really the strength of it, because no matter what you do, you can save whatever kind of effect stack that you want into a preset super easily. So you can, apply it to any model. And like I said, like any game, like if you want to get into games at all, like you have to learn Substance. Like it's just the standard material authoring tool for that kind of world. Like I play a lot of Switch 2 and stuff like that, and I can tell, I was like, oh yeah, they used this Substance effect for that, and so it's super
the
cool.
danger of our career, right? Like everything you look at, you're
awesome.
breaking it down as soon as you're
Yeah.
as soon as you start enjoying it, you're like, oh, but also how does this relate to work? It's just there. So
we interrupt this podcast briefly to tell you about our All Access program, the #1 way on the internet to learn the toolbox of motion design. For one price, you get access to every single course we're making, including all upcoming courses, as long as your subscription is active. You get unlimited critique from a professional motion designer on 100% of the projects you upload, access to our 24/7 community, which hosts monthly live portfolio reviews and live guest workshops on all kinds of awesome topics. If you complete a project-based course, you also get a verified credential that you can show off. Join over 3,000 artists from all over the world who are dedicated to improving their careers and their skill set. All the details are on our site. Check the link in the description. We hope to see you in class. All right, I think now we should talk about Figma. And we have our first Figma course coming out early next year. So Figma is an interesting one to me because it kind of started as the tool just for like designing websites and products and stuff like that. And what they've been doing is slowly expanding what it can do to where now they have drawing tools in it. And it's become a very, very powerful design tool, but it works completely different than Photoshop and Illustrator. It's got way different strengths. It's missing a bunch of features that Photoshop has and stuff like that. So the big news with Figma this year, so Adobe tried to acquire them. That officially fell through at the beginning of at last year. And then they IPO'd this year. So they just decided, okay, fine, we didn't get acquired. We're just going to become a publicly traded company. And their stock, like a lot of, like Adobe stock, is down very significantly from the beginning of their IPO. I think that has more to do with the kind of shenanigans that that bankers do when they bring a company public and insider trading and stuff, but it's my theory. Mm-hmm. But I think the big thing with Figma is at the beginning of this year, Figma basically had like a couple of things it could do. It had its design tool, and it had this cool thing called FigJam. FigJam, and it's kind of a separate app, but it's inside the same main Figma app where you can, it's almost like Milanote. You can like flowchart things and you can make plans and simple graphics, but really it's for planning. And then they announced all this new stuff. So now you can design a website and then click a button and now it's a live website. You can do stuff like that. It's got an AI thing that can help you prototype little pieces of apps and all that. I think the biggest announcement, which was made pretty recently, was they acquired a company called Weavy. And Figma, they haven't gone as all in into AI as Adobe has, but Weavy is like Comfy UI. It's a node-based AI comping tool. And I've actually been using it a lot the last month on a project for School of Motion. And I got to say, it's amazing. And nice. It took me a while to get the hang of it. Once you get it, you're like, whoa, you kind of, and again, like I said before, you have to think a completely different way. Like if I wanted the same result before AI, you could do it. It might just take way longer. And there's things that you might have to hire someone else to help you with if you're not good at it. But now once you wrap your head around how these tools can be just a part of your process that you already have, it's pretty amazing. And it's weird because Weavy doesn't seem to obviously fit into anything Figma is known for doing right now. So I think this kind of like speaks to the direction they're going in. But I think as far as motion design folk are concerned, I think it's almost time to start saying, okay, you probably still need to learn Photoshop. You probably still need to learn, at least be familiar with Illustrator if you're going to be working with your motion design toolbox. Figma can almost replace probably 60 to 70% of that now. And in some ways, it's a far better tool.
Hi, my name's Becky, and I'm a motion designer and illustrator. I first started using Figma mostly for kind of team projects. So, that kind of initial ideation phase where you're brainstorming and coming up with ideas. For me, it was really great in a kind of remote working environment, and it kind of replicated that buzz of working inside of a studio. And then I was also using it for things like, sharing works with clients and presentations as well. And then over time, I guess, I became such a fan of the interface that I just started to design and draw in Figma. And I realized they had all these really great tools and features that made designing, just such an enjoyable process. And yeah, I was just a big fan of it. I love how collaborative and flexible Figma is. I can brainstorm, design, and pitch all of my ideas in one place. To be able to go right from those kind of early phases of a project right through to the pitching stage in one place is something that is, very unique to Figma. And, it's really great to not have to rely on multiple programs or bits of software to do those things in separate places. So, yeah. But yeah, I would say Adobe kind of still wins when it comes to things like heavier illustration projects and photo editing, especially. I would say those tools aren't necessarily as developed just yet inside of Figma. But yeah, for kind of day-to-day design and concepting, I find that Figma is just faster. I'm definitely excited and have been excited about the Figma draw tools. I think things like the textured brushes and effects have been a real kind of game changer for me in my work. And I would say, one of the main kind of driving forces as to why I wanted to use it more in my work and why I am using it more with my work. The process of adding detail to illustrations just feels a lot smoother than Illustrator at the moment. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they continue to expand on those. Obviously there's, UI and UX design. I think, those are the ones that everyone knows Figma for. But I would definitely say that, features like the kind of components inside of Figma, I think they're going to speed up the workflow for all kinds of design tasks. You can see how it would really help for things like campaigns, especially very big ones, right through to kind of icon design, for example. I think also the fact that you can easily export work from Figma, to apps like Cavalry and Rive, shows it's going to be a really great tool when it comes to motion design as well, potentially, but only if it keeps expanding. If Figma starts to work more kind of seamlessly with tools like Rive and Cavalry and adds kind of stronger photo editing capabilities, I could definitely see a future where I rely on Adobe a lot less. That said, I'm not sure there will ever be, a single app that will cover absolutely everything, designers need. I think it will always be a case where we have to kind of do one thing in one app and one thing in another. It's whether or not those things are going to be Adobe based. I think that's, the question. They've continued to experiment with non-Adobe tools. We're already kind of seeing it at the moment, but, right from that kind of design phase, right through to the kind of motion design phase, I think it will be interesting to see people kind of trying out new app combinations and seeing if they can kind of continue to kind of step away from that workflow that we're all kind of so used to using. So yeah, to me, it kind of feels like the beginning of a shift kind of, towards a more kind of diverse design setup, and one that doesn't kind of, rely on Adobe or even use it altogether.
It's built to be collaborative. So it's just this endless canvas. You can have as many artboards as you want, as many layers, and multiple people can be working on the same thing at the same time, and you see the other person's mouse. You can leave comments. You can have different pages. You can organize things a different way. There's this feature called components, which is kind of like pre-comps, but way more powerful, where you can very easily make variations of things. And so I've heard from a lot of just straight up motion designers. The instructor for our first Figma course worked at Animate. She's like an illustrator designer, and she uses Figma a lot. and said that she still has to jump back and forth between the Adobe stuff, but Figma's starting to replace a lot of that. And now there's tools like Battle Axe, which can go easily from Figma into After Effects. The company Canva, they're really into Cavalry. They made a tool that lets you go from Figma to Cavalry in like a click or two. And so Figma is just an interesting one. It's, I don't think it's like a required thing to learn yet, but depending on what area you want to work in, it may actually be. If you're working, on any sort of web product interaction design, you're designing it in Figma, or at the very least, you're assembling your design there. And you can copy and paste between Figma and Rive as well. Are either of you using Figma, or is this just a Joey thing for now?
I've just had, like, when I've worked at different companies, they had me jump into Figma to like grab elements that were kind of kept in these projects, but I'm not a Figma user, for sure not.
Yeah, the only thing I've seen is we have our local Denver meetup here, and we had a presenter that did some like Figma awareness campaign kind of thing.
Nice.
And one of the things that, because we with all these new tools, it's like, is this just replicating a lot of what like Photoshop can already do and all that kind of stuff? And I would say the one thing that they showed off in Figma that I found was really interesting, and it reminds me of the stuff you can do in Rive, where I forget what it's called, but it's the dynamically like adjusting a design and all the elements kind of fit like perfectly inside of it. So that's something that like that Photoshop can't do that, as far as I know. After Effects can't do that. So that was one of those things with the collaboration aspect as well that really popped out, and that was like one of the aha moments during that presentation there.
Yeah. So what you're mentioning, EJ, is called responsive design. And if you're building anything for a product or a car or a website, of course, it has to be built responsively. It's just table stakes, right? And, Adobe has XD, which I feel like is kind of just getting deprecated and no one uses anymore. That was kind of their answer to Figma and Sketch, which is another web tool, another product design tool. But Figma, from the beginning, has had ways to do that. And now that tool is very, very mature. It's called Auto Layout. And, if you're a motion designer, if you design and animate, you're used to making little 30-second animations or social media things. The reason to care about that, specifically with Rive, Cavalry has this feature now too. You can actually make responsive designs. And After Effects has plugins that can sort of, in a very, very clunky, hacky way, do that for you. It's very painful and takes a lot of setup, and it's easy to break. But you literally can now, if you know these tools. After Effects is lagging behind, but if you know Figma and you know Rive, or you know Figma and you know Cavalry, you can build designs that you don't even know what size the screen is going to be, that it's going to show on. It could be any size. And you're setting up design rules of how things will rearrange. And if it's tall, use this set of rules. If it's wide, use this set of rules. And it's insanely powerful. And if you're working, for Google and you're helping to work on a website or an app, you have to design things responsively and they have to be executed responsibly. So Figma is like where all that stuff starts typically. And you can translate a lot of that over to these other apps and to websites and Webflow and Framer and all these things. So I think it's a really important skill for anyone who's not in the traditional linear motion design world. You should start getting familiar with that. Our Rive Academy Volume 2 class teaches you how it works and then how it works in Rive. Because the way it works is the way it works. It works that way just across the board on every platform. It's just the tools are called slightly different things, slightly different options. But that's a rabbit hole. And we have another Figma course we're working on for next year that will get into how that works inside of Figma, so motion designers can start actually designing those things responsively. So that's a big one. Another app, I don't have too much to say about it other than I love it to death, is Descript. And I've talked about it before. It's an editing app, right? It's a built-in transcription. It can do a lot of things now. The interesting thing that they did this year was they've always had AI tools, like it can automatically add chapter markers for you and name them correctly. So we use that. It can automatically find the best highlights, like the best sound bites, and cut those out and put them in another sequence for you. So that's really helpful. But now it's got what I keep hearing referred to as an agent inside of it, an AI agent. So the difference between like ChatGPT and an agent is ChatGPT, you talk to it and then it answers you, and then you talk to it and it answers you. you can tell it to go look at this website and it can go off and do that and then come back. That's kind of what an agent is. But a real agent is, like, for example, hey, here's a 6-hour podcast. I don't know how long it's going to be, but and then here's 4.5 hours of sound bites. Go find the sound bites that fit into this and then put them in the right place, and it will go do that. Now, I don't suspect it'll work that well. I'm going to try it. But that's what you can do. You can now type in commands to Descript and say, edit this down to 30 seconds, make sure to keep this part, and it will just go do it. And then you can say, add music and edit it so it ends cleanly, and it will do that. So it's one of these interface things that's really coming up more and more. People are trying to do this with After Effects now. People are trying to do it with Rive has a version of this too. And I'm skeptical that this is actually how we'll be interacting with apps, but it's kind of an interesting idea, and Descript is kind of all in with it. So they've got their AI bot that you can talk to. Now here's an interesting one. Affinity. Have either of you used the Affinity apps yet?
No.
Okay. So in case someone listening doesn't know, Affinity makes 3 apps. They make Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, and Affinity Layout or something. It's basically InDesign. It's like a print layout app. And they were selling them for, I think, $79. You could get all 3 of them for like $200. It was a one-time fee, and you just own them. And these are modern, basically, versions of Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. And they're great. They work really, really well. You can even import and export Photoshop files using them. And so then they get acquired by Canva. Now, Canva, you may not have even heard of them if you're a professional motion designer. This isn't something that you may use very often. It's one of the biggest design companies in the world. It has half the market cap of Adobe. So it's been around a lot less time. And it's basically a web-based design tool that has a million templates and assets, and it makes it really easy to design social media graphics and YouTube thumbnails, stuff like that. Very, very useful for companies. They acquired Affinity, and they made their apps totally free. So now, if you don't want to pay for Photoshop or Illustrator, you can go download for free right now Affinity Photo and Designer. And now it's all inside of one app. It's just the Affinity app. And when you're in there, there's a little toggle at the top. Which app do you want to use? And you can seamlessly move your file between all 3 apps and go back and forth and work in it. So I played around with it for about an hour. If you know Photoshop and Illustrator, you don't even need instructions. It works mostly the same way. There's some differences, and there's, the recipes are different for certain things. It has a lot of features I like. In Photoshop, one of the things that's always bothered me is if you want to put a filter on something but not have it baked in, you have to first make it a smart object. Right? Yeah. Which is kind of annoying. Like, it seems like...
Right. I mean, I came from After Effects first almost, man. I used Photoshop a little bit, and like After Effects is non-destructive. Coming to Photoshop, it's always been like, why do I need to break something to like make it, right? Like that's always been my complaint. So.
Yeah, and and even just simple things like if I scale down something in Photoshop, but I haven't made it a smart layer, it loses all the resolution. It's destructive, right? And Affinity is mostly non-destructive unless you like tell it to, And so it first of all, it's just like that's a more modern way that I'm guessing the reason Photoshop works the way it does is because it's, 30 years old or probably even older than that, right? And so back in the day, well, we don't really have gigabytes of RAM, right? That wasn't even a thing. And so we need to think about memory. And so we're just going to ditch that data. And otherwise save a copy of that layer if you think you might need it. And so there's a lot of ways you end up working in Photoshop that if you sit and think about it for 5 seconds, you're like, this is actually like really inefficient and kind of silly. And why do I have all these smart layers? And then if you need to make a copy of a smart layer and change that one, it's kind of a pain. So Affinity just works better, like for a lot of that stuff. Affinity is also a modern app. It's only, maybe 10 years old, something like that. So all the architecture is just newer. And so everything's like instant. And this is especially noticeable when you go from Illustrator to Affinity Designer. Zooming in and out, manipulating giant vectors is instantaneous. There's never lag, ever. So it's pretty interesting, and it's free. So there's an interesting...
I was going to say that this whole thing, like when they got bought, obviously the panic that something terrible was going to happen to the software happened, right?
Right.
I remember that when it got bought, and a week before they made it free, they actually took it off their site, so you couldn't buy it.
Right.
And people were like, "What?" They were just like they were like furious, right? Like I'd never seen people like, I can't even buy it right now. I need like I have licenses already, and I need more so that we can work. And like a week later, it was free, and anyone can have it. It was just really interesting to see that switch.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, unlike there's obviously a correlation here between C40 and Blender, and then Photoshop, Illustrator, and the Affinity apps, where you've now got this free thing that is, like, in most cases just as good, and in some cases way better, and it's free. And so, you know, the obvious thought is, okay, is this actually, I mean, it's obviously shots fired at Adobe. In fact, they announced it on the last day of Adobe Max to kind of steal some of the thunder, right? Which I thought was brilliant. And the marketing around it's been great, right? And Canva has a pretty good reputation, you know, so the thought is, okay, does this impact Adobe at all? And I think that this actually might, because, you know, for people that animate, well, there's no Affinity animation app yet. Maybe they acquire one or they build one themselves. That would take years. But if you're animating, you need After Effects. Like you have to have it. And so you're already going to have a Creative Cloud subscription, and there's way more Photoshop and Illustrator training as of now than there is Affinity. So they're a little bit insulated, but there's like other industries where you don't need to animate. You just need to design. You need to photo retouch or whatever. Or I think this is actually a pretty big deal. But having watched Blender over the years, you know, some people might have assumed, oh, there's this new free 3D app that's like just as good. Everyone's going to switch by next year. By next year, no one will purchase Cinema 4D anymore. Of course, that's not the case. And Aaron, we've talked about this in the past. I'm curious, like, you know, if you have any thoughts on what having a free Photoshop and Illustrator alternative that are actually good. Like this isn't Pixamator or something, you know, some open source thing that this is okay.
So we've always said that the way that, like, for that to happen, for people to make the change, there needs to be a really good reason, right? If you're using After Effects, there's not a great reason to go over it, because like you'd have to, you know, like you need it. It's Photoshop, Illustrator, it's all integrated, right? But if you're someone who's just doing graphic design or you know, who's really just focused on the still imagery, you're right. I mean, I think that this might be the thing, especially if the transition's not hard to make, but even more so, anybody new, you know, like there's no reason for them to necessarily go to Adobe, except like if they're looking for jobs where the jobs are like you need to use Photoshop. But I think more and more people are just being hired to do the thing. And like no one's going to say you can't use a free tool if it's going to, you know, if you can get the job done, especially if it can really do the job. So I think next year we'll see a lot more of what, you know, what that looks like. But I do think we're going to see an impact on usage. Again, is it going to really hurt Adobe and like they're like tremendously? Man, you know, so much of their business is diversified. Again, like there's that marketing stuff, you know, the video stuff. You can't, if you're in video, you're not using that. But who knows? Like I'd love to see what happens, but I don't have an answer for you. It takes a lot to make people switch, and you know, there's definitely something there. But I also felt that about Unreal, and we're starting to see that too with Unreal. Like people, you know, switching is not necessarily the right word, but maybe using it because they can do, you know, it's free, why not use it and also use the other thing? So I don't know. I think over time it'll, like, I'm sorry, like, you ask me those questions and I'm always like, I don't know. Like that's
we're supposed to speculate, you know. I just want to.
Yeah, okay.
I'm throwing darts, you know.
Here's my speculation. If I'm really just trying to like say like what could happen is I think that people will start using both. They'll definitely experiment with it, especially if they're not married to the other products in the Adobe suite. But, you know, I think that people in our core audience are going to, generally speaking, stay with After Effects and Photoshop and Illustrator. So
interesting. Yeah, the reason that Canva did this, and I think they've even said this, but it's kind of obvious. It's like they have the kind of you know, they kind of own the lower end of the design market, like, you know, mostly like non-designers that need a lot of design. Or junior designers that need to just make tons of stuff really quickly and they don't have time to design from scratch, so they use Canva. They didn't have the up market, right? They don't have the high-end designer. Now, this is a really good strategy for a company worth $65 billion or whatever they're worth right now, to kind of acquire a bunch of them. And then their ultimate goal is, I assume, to bring them back into the Canva ecosystem. Right now, Affinity is free, but they have AI features in it that you can't use unless you have a paid Canva account. And from what I've seen, the Canva AI features on the Canva app itself, which is a web app, it's mostly around like auto layout or generating an image you can place into a design or something like that. It's not really like what Photoshop has. So if you want to have content-aware fill, or you want to integrate Nano Banana to do something really complicated, I don't think you can do that in Affinity right now. And Affinity always had a way less AI-friendly stance than Adobe does. So it'll be interesting to see how that culture clashes with Canva, who has a lot of AI and doesn't seem to be shying away from it. So I think that's interesting.
I can tell you who's going to win that war. I can tell you who's going to win that war, right? It's going to be the company that bought the other company. It doesn't matter. The people that work there may resist it for a while, but if that's their stance, if their stance is, I've seen it many times, like their stance is we're in it with AI, like AI is coming to these apps, 100%.
All right, so now we'll talk about, so it's interesting, like, when we get to Rive, I'm going to gush about it. That's not going to surprise anybody. I'm going to gush about this one, too. So Cavalry. So I'm assuming you two have not touched Cavalry yet, right?
Just barely. When it first came out, especially, I was playing with it, but I have not used it recently.
I was going to say, you need to tell me when Cavalry went from like an afterthought to like did they have a big update? Because I feel like Cavalry's been around for years now, and it just didn't get traction. And then I feel like just all of a sudden this year something happened, and now I'm seeing it all over the place. So
yeah, I think what happened, if I had to guess, it's that there's some critical mass of artists who have figured it out. And so now you're starting to see, because the capabilities, it's added a lot of capabilities this year, but it's always had the core ones, and the way it works hasn't changed. But now enough artists are using it that there are now some really good artists using it and making crazy stuff that like we featured on Motion Mondays, and it goes viral on Instagram. And there's an artist, Fafa, I believe he's Chinese, who's done some crazy, amazing, beautiful stuff in Cavalry. Yeah. And so, I think like mass adoption, it's really hard to know when that's going to happen for any tool, right? Because you need the tool to be good. Then you need artists to know how to use it, which for Cavalry is tricky because it's not a simple thing to use. And then you need artists that understand it who are good in making good art and then also promoting themselves. Then you need an ecosystem of training and companies asking for it. And so you kind of, it's like a table that needs 8 legs to stand up at all, and you have to build them all at the same time. It just takes a long time. I don't know if that. What do you think about that metaphor? Yeah.
I was going to say, I would say though that a lot of what went like kept them from even really sort of like rising to the level of attention where we would pay a lot more attention to it is they had a rough start, which is the initial thought when people saw it was like, this will replace After Effects, only to discover that they still needed to do all this. Like After Effects does something and this does something else, and that like you might be able to use them together, but they're not even integrated. Why would I do that? I want to stay in After Effects. So I think there's like, even though that wasn't necessarily what they were marketing as, that was the perception, the initial perception, and then the initial disappointment. And by the way, that's like with a lot of technologies, like the company has an idea about what it can do, but people are like, oh, this is going to be the next After Effects. And then it's not. And you're like, that's it. So I think that like they kind of fell very quickly out of mind for a lot of people. And then the ones who knew and the ones who saw the value in it, said, I'm just going to keep using it, hoping that the company doesn't go bankrupt, which they didn't, And so now they're starting to have a resurgence as these people have been doing more and more with it. And it's getting, the examples are better and the software definitely has come a long way. That I've seen the features that get released, as they go has been definitely, leaps each way.
My name's Greg Stewart. I'm a motion designer, animator, director, all those sorts of things. Currently, I'm employed full-time at a nonprofit in the Portland area called Bible Project. Before that, I was an art director and animator and founding member at a studio in Vancouver, Canada called Ordinary Folk. Since I've achieved Cavalry Brain, so to speak, though I don't know if I've fully achieved it yet, there's always more to learn, I'd say I probably use After Effects 40% less. At least in my current work, most of the final exports that I do for shots and combined projects are going to be out of After Effects and not Cavalry. But I would say that I use After Effects significantly less now that I have become really familiar with Cavalry. And I'd also say that it's replaced a lot of the things that I used to do in After Effects. And even things that I used to really enjoy doing. I feel like when I was really getting into After Effects, some of my favorite things to do were to build really complicated expressions rigs to work with multiple shapes or control tons of different things, all from a single null with a bunch of different sliders, or just to try and break After Effects to do things that it couldn't really do on its own. And I still enjoy doing some of that. But now that I have Cavalry in my toolkit, I can do a lot of those sorts of things in just a couple clicks. And it's way faster, and it frees up a ton of my time to focus more in on animation curves and some of the other things that are also really important. So I'd say for those sorts of things, especially working with tons of different shapes or manipulating a lot of things all at once, Cavalry is for sure my go-to. But I think that's also had the benefit of freeing me up to use After Effects more for what it's really good at. I think I'd say to any motion designer out there who is curious about learning Cavalry, but maybe hasn't dipped their toes in quite yet, it is 100% worth getting over the learning curve. There is a learning curve. I've heard some rumors that School of Motion might be putting out a class on Cavalry that will probably be really, really good. But once you do get over that curve, it's tons of fun to play around with. And for me, it was just really refreshing to start using a different animation tool other than After Effects and see what kinds of things that opened up for me. Some other things that have been really awesome about Cavalry for me have just been getting to interact directly with the people making Cavalry in their Discord channel. I've had feature requests get implemented into the software, sometimes within days or weeks, depending on how lucky I am with the timing of when I suggest things. So it's been super refreshing for me to feel like the features that I'm requesting or bugs I'm reporting are actually being listened to. And I know they're not just listening to me, they're listening to everybody in the community, which is really, really awesome. I cannot say enough good things about the people who make Cavalry. Ian and Chris are just such nice people, and anytime I've interacted with them, they've just been so kind and willing to help. And I think it really helps that they also come from an animation background as well. I think all of these things contribute to why there's been a lot more hype around Cavalry recently, and bigger studios like Buck and Illo are starting to use Cavalry in their work. And even the team at Canva has started making some really awesome tools for working with Cavalry, particularly one called Quiver that helps you bring stuff from Figma right into Cavalry super easily. There's just a lot of growth around Cavalry and excitement, and I think it's really worth checking out. One of the other really amazing things about Cavalry is how fast it is evolving and changing. I feel like the team is constantly putting out new builds and shipping new features. It's honestly hard to keep on top of. I went on vacation early this year for a few days and came back and found that Cavalry had all of a sudden introduced motion tracking in their beta software and a bunch of other new filters and effects and things like that. So it's evolving really fast. I think a couple specific new features from Cavalry in 2025 that stood out to me were the huge load of filters that they dropped with 2.5. Previous to that, I don't know that I would have said filters and effects were a weakness of Cavalry, but I definitely wouldn't have said they were a strength. And I think that's really been changing in the last couple builds that they've shipped out. Not only have they been adding a bunch of new filters, but they've also been working on performance a lot, and Cavalry does not tend to chug as much when you start working with a bunch of effects and stacking them up on a bunch of different shapes and things like that. So that's been really nice to see. A couple other really awesome features are referencing, which lets you save your scene file, your Cavalry file, as a template that other people can then import and use as sort of like an essential graphics rig in their scene. And then any edits that you make in your original scene will get updated in the scenes of whoever is using your scene, if that makes sense. One other really exciting feature for me this year was the arrival of the dependency graph, which is kind of like a node-based way of working inside of Cavalry. If you've got experience in Blender working with geometry nodes or shaders, it's going to feel really intuitive. I think that is just a really fun way of working in Cavalry, but I think it also helps you make more sense of how Cavalry works, because even though it looks layer-based on the front end, it is really a node-based software under the hood. I'm not sure that I'll ever work 100% in Cavalry, and that'd be true for kind of any software, honestly. I sort of have this philosophy of wanting to use the right tool for the right job. And one analogy I've used in explaining that is that a hammer is a super versatile tool. You can do a lot of things with a hammer. You maybe technically could chop down a tree with a hammer if you spent a lot of time and went through a lot of hammers, but you should probably just use something like a chainsaw. Or if you're trying to get into like being like an ice sculptor or something, I've heard you can do that with a chainsaw as well. But all that to say, there's some things that I really, really love using Cavalry for, and there's other things where at least currently it doesn't make as much sense. So compositing work, or especially if I'm working with Photoshop art, I'm probably going to do that in After Effects. But I think in terms of things that would help me work more exclusively inside of Cavalry, I'd love to see some growth in being able to work with Photoshop and Illustrator assets. Currently, you can just import a flattened PSD, and I'm sure it's complicated to figure out how to import layers, but that would be one really awesome feature that would help me stay in Cavalry a little bit more. Outside of that, I think it'd be really helpful to just have the Cavalry community grow and have more people using it and making scripts and tools and plugins and those sorts of things. I think After Effects is such an industry standard and has been that way for such a long time. When working with other studios or clients, it can be hard to sell people on using a different software because they're so used to what they already know. In terms of where Cavalry might be aiming in the coming years, or where I'd like to see Cavalry aim, I do have some inklings of some really, really incredible features that might be coming down the line in the near future. If you're in the Cavalry Discord, you might know what I'm talking about. Can't say anything yet, but there's some really cool things coming. In terms of what I'd like to see, though, maybe hard to articulate super well, but I think of a couple things. I'd love to see Cavalry continue to capitalize on what it's really good at, so things like speed and performance, and also just shipping really good features really quickly, continuing to evolve. I would love more reasons to not have to open After Effects, but I also don't want Cavalry to become too focused on being an After Effects competitor, because I think they're just very different softwares, and I don't want to see Cavalry become just known as the After Effects alternative. There's a lot of things that make After Effects great. There's also things that make Cavalry great, and I think the strengths are very different. Anything they can come up with that makes working with large data sets is always exciting to me too, because that's become a personal favorite way of using Cavalry for me.
Yeah. So we've got our first Cavalry course coming out next year. And so I've been watching all the lessons. And before we started recording it, I met with the instructor and he walked me through, we have this like very detailed process of how we make courses at School of Motion. And as he was walking through how he was going to teach it and what he thought should be included in it and kind of showing me some things, I finally had the aha moment. And I think that that's what is really making it hard for people to adopt Cavalry. Because I think you're exactly right. Aaron, when it came out, it looks like After Effects. Like the interface is similar enough where you're like, oh, there's a timeline. Oh, there's a project panel and a comp viewer. And oh, they have effects. And they're not called effects, but they look like effects. And so you thought, oh, this just works like After Effects. And it can. You can have layers and keyframes in a graph editor. It has all that. You can animate stuff. It's got, it's not always real time, but the preview is way, way faster than After Effects. But that's not what's cool about it. What's cool about it, and I've used this term before, is it is Houdini for 2D. So if you don't know how Houdini works, that's not going to mean anything. But essentially, the whole thing is procedural, right? And so what that means is you could, and this is the difficult thing about it too, you can have a word that you've typed out into a type layer, and then you can access every vertice of that piece of type, and you can attach things to it, and then you can attach behaviors to those things, and then you can attach like lines to those things that are attached to other, and you can create these crazy 2D systems, and you can build things that look like they were done in Houdini or their code or something like that, but you don't have to touch code. It's all just piping things together. And what's difficult about it is you have to first get Cavalry brain, is what we're calling it. You have to kind of develop an intuition for like, okay, I've got a duplicator, which is like a cloner in Cinema 4D, and I want to iterate across these 5 clones, but I want them to randomly move, but I want this one to always be still, but the rest of them move. And you can do all of that, and you don't need code. And you can code if you want. There's a full code editor in it, but you don't need any of that. And so I think the hard thing is you're going to have to relearn how to think about doing things, step one, and that takes a little while. Then your brain starts going, oh, what if I did this with that? What if I did this? And that's when you start getting these really cool animations that you're seeing on Instagram and places like that. So it is not an After Effects replacement. It is just not. It never will be. It's not designed to be. It's a totally different thing. But I think the reason that companies like Canva are really interested in it is because you can set up systems. Like the way After Effects works is you're building a comp. And you can use expressions, and if you're really clever with pre-comps and maybe essential graphics and maybe some plugins, you could theoretically build a system where you put in type and an image or a folder of images and it spits out all your variations at different resolutions, right? But it's very hard to do that in After Effects. It's not impossible. You can use Data Clay, a templater, but like these things are not intuitive. They're not built in. Some of them are very expensive. It's all built into Cavalry. You can link it to a Google Sheet. You can have responsive designs where everything is exactly where you want it, and it's all this node-based kind of way of thinking. And then you hit render, and it renders 1,000 things very quickly into folders named correctly at all 4 sizes. And so once you see it done from start to finish, and that's what this course is, it shows you the whole process and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. Once you see that, it's like, oh, okay, I actually have to do that a lot. Like, you know, big tech companies, they're constantly, I mean, just for social media, Cavalry is better than After Effects if you can achieve the look you want. And that's a big if, because it doesn't have all the filters and all the tools After Effects does, and it probably won't ever have all of them, although this year they did add a built-in tracker, which kind of shocked me. A keyer, they added project referencing, which is like XREFs in Cinema 4D, so you can like create a Cavalry project, leave some controls exposed, hand that off to another artist, and then they can use that in their Cavalry project, and then you can update it. I mean, it's really, really cool. When the course comes out, I think it's going to blow a lot of people's minds, and we are actually starting to hear companies talk about it. This was like one of the reasons we wanted to make this course was like, wait, Canva's using it? Like they're really like interested in it. And there's other companies too, but that's a huge company. That's one that has lots of artists doing lots of things, lots of social media. So I think Cavalry, you know, I think like everything else, it's going to take a long time for it to really gain mass adoption, but it feels like they've hit an inflection point. I'm hearing more.